we'll go ahead and get started. And first, I'd like to do some introductions. So I wanted to provide first undisputable photographic evidence that both myself and Ethan have worked with drones. So you can't argue with those two photographs of both of us in the field. So I'm John O'Connell. I am a PhD candidate at Southern Illinois University. And I mostly work with GIS and remote sensing. And in the past year, I've gotten involved with using some drones. Ethan here has helped on some of the projects that we've done, and then also did some drone work looking for nesting ducks and predators on the prairies up in Manitoba with Delta waterfowl. As far as an overview, I sent out a survey a few weeks ago to the people who were already signed up and got, of course, an array of responses. So I can't cover everything for everyone, but I'll try to fit in as much as I can. Most people hadn't flown a drone, weren't certified to fly a drone, and were kind of 101 level. A few people are already certified and are just looking to learn a little bit more. So I won't spend all the time trying to train you to pass a test, but I also won't just skip over what you need to do to get licensed. So we'll try to cover it all in there. As I said, feel free to get up and move about. If you have fairly specific questions about your stuff, I will be here after, and I will be here through Wednesday. So rather than slowing us down with that, feel free to talk to me about it afterwards. So you signed up for a UAV workshop, and I've said drone about 20 times already. So what's the difference? Well, there really isn't any. It's just the use. So if I'm writing it, I'm going to probably write UAV for a paper, publications, anything for PR, because there's a negative connotation sometimes with drones. They might be used for targeted killings or espionage. It's the annoying neighbor flying a drone in your backyard while you're in the swimming pool. So best policy is to use the TLAs, the three-letter acronyms. What are those acronyms? UAV is an unmanned aerial vehicle. UAS would be unmanned aerial systems. So the difference is the vehicle is what we would call the drone. So this is the vehicle, but the vehicle with the remote, the display, and everything else you need to make it fly is the system. And then small UAS just means that it's under 55 pounds, including payload. So these are under 55 pounds. So we would call these sUAS. So brainstorm if you guys have some ideas on why we might use sUAS over other methods that we already have. We'll talk a bunch. Safety. So we've been using aerial surveys for a long time, but it's one of the most hazardous parts of our field, flying planes at low altitude and making maneuvers. So if we can do it with something that if it crashes, it just costs us money and not lives, that's an advantage. Any others?
More cost effective?
It can be more cost effective. It varies from study to study, and sometimes in the long run, you might have been better off to just go out there and do it on foot or with a plane. But in many cases, it is more cost effective. Anybody else? Okay, I've got a list, and it's not all inclusive, but using drones is going to offer us the bird's eye view. So if we go out and walk around the field, we're not getting that aerial perspective. It can be more efficient than doing ground surveys, depending on what your objective is, and sometimes less expensive, like we talked about. It can give you access to areas that are impractical or dangerous. So just after a flood or something like that, you're not going to want to go out in a canoe and try to get out to your field site, but you might be able to check on it with the drone. It can present a different, but not always better, type of disturbance to wildlife. I say different, but not always better. Some wildlife might be more frightened by a drone, and some might not care about it. We'll have a speaker later who will talk about some disturbance with drones. And We can also outfit them with sensors that capture things that we can't capture with the naked eye. So we could put thermal sensors on them, or infrared sensors, or hyperspectral sensors that see things we can't see otherwise, and that can get us some more information. And if you're curious about that picture, there actually is a competition flying drones with your brain. That's how they control them. So you can look that up on YouTube. It's pretty cool. So because the majority of people aren't already certified, I will briefly discuss some legal requirements so that you can prepare for what you might have to go through to meet the FAA regulations. First off, FAA use of sUAS falls under their Part 107 regulations. So when I say Part 107, I'm talking about drone regulations. When you are using a drone recreationally, you are not subject to Part 107, but when you use it commercially, you are. So almost everybody in this room is mostly probably trying to use it commercially, whether it's for research or agency purposes, consulting, etc. Even if you're just taking pretty pictures and selling on the internet, that can be construed as commercial use. If you want to fly under Part 107, you have to get a remote pilot certificate up there in the upper left corner. If you're flying recreationally, you don't have to have that. Additionally, you have to register your drone if it's being used for commercial use. So this, which is the Mavic 2, we have to have our registration clearly marked on here, and we have to keep that certificate and our license with us at any time we are operating. Going back to recreational use, drones under 250 grams do not have to be registered for recreational use. So this is the Mavic Mini, which is conveniently 249 grams. So to get your license, you're going to have to take an exam. And the Part 107 exam isn't extremely difficult, having gone through it, but it's not something you're going to just walk in and take and pass probably. You do have to get a 70% or higher, and there is some fairly specific information on there that you probably will need some practice before you can answer those questions. I do see a lot of people jotting down notes. I just do want to remind you that the Google Drive has this PowerPoint with all my speaker notes. So if there are any details you missed, you can always go back and view them. And also you can always email me and I can try to answer your questions. Jot down what you want, but I don't want you to feel like you have to get it all down. So if you're trying to prepare for the Part 107 exam, there's a couple options to do it for free, to prepare for free. First of all, FAAsafety.gov offers a Part 107 training course, but it's built for people who already have a Part 61 certification, which is a aeronautical training certification. You can access it, but it might be a little bit over your head. It might assume that you already have a lot of knowledge. Also, YouTube has some training videos that range from 10 minutes to 2 hours. I've assembled a list and put it in that link. So if you access the PowerPoint, you can click that link and there'll be a playlist built just for you for this course or for the workshop. And then you can always Google practice questions, and articles are all over the internet. Also can refer to the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, which is the official regulations. That's the textbook. But it's the textbook for a lot of parts, not just Part 107. So it's probably going to be way more than you really want to get into. What I would recommend is pay for an online course. There's a ton of information, and it can be distilled down to what you need to know to be a safe operator and pass the test. They're going to teach you to the test. So there's numerous options. I was just going to highlight two. The most popular is probably Drone Pilot Ground School. Everybody I know went through that. It was recommended, and then Ethan and I both took it, and it worked fine. We passed on our first attempt. It was fairly straightforward. You just watch about 10 to 15 hours of the videos, take some practice tests, read some articles, go take the test, not too bad. It is $300 to $400 per person, and that gets you lifetime access. Lifetime access can be important because you will have to renew every 2 years and retake a recurrent test. So it'd be nice to log back in and view it again. Drone U is an alternative. I didn't go through their course, but I have consumed a lot of their content. They put out some podcasts that are really informative, and they seem to be even more in-depth, now have more in-depth knowledge than Drone Pilot Ground School. But I haven't taken their course to say whether it's better or not. I'm sure both of them will help you pass the test just fine. One exciting thing about that is that they're marketing it at $47 a month or $27 a month for students, and that they say that you can cancel anytime. So if you can get your studying done in a month, I imagine you could save a lot of money compared to Drone Pilot Ground School. There are also in-person options where somebody will come out and train you. I think that if you're not confident flying, that might be useful, but as far as test prep, it's probably overboard. I will suggest that if you sign up for any of these, you contact them or look and see if they have a discounts page for agency or educational use. And if not, Google discount codes for it, because most of them do have some sort of discount code somewhere on the web. So after you've studied, you'll have to go take the 107 test. The link at the bottom of the page will take you to where you can search for test center locations. You can also just Google FAA Part 107 test locations and it'll get you here. You pay $150 to take the test. We were able to get a discount because our school has a aeronautics school, so we were taking it on campus as students and it was a little bit less. But normally $150. You'll have to get a 70% to pass, and then in about 2 weeks after you submit your results, you'll get a temporary airman certificate in the mail. With that, you can start flying. Eventually, temporary certificate comes via email. The actual hard copy will come in the mail in about a month or two. It takes a little while, but you can still fly about 2 weeks after. That's good for 2 years, and it costs about $150 to take the test again every 2 years to renew. That's all I'm really going to dive into as far as what you have to do to become a licensed pilot. I'm going to start to talk about some limitations to using drones, because I think it's very easy to think, oh, I'm just going to go buy one of these and we're going to fly around and collect all the data. It's going to be awesome. Or we're going to go check all the management that we're doing. And there are some restrictions that are going to handicap you a bit. So I'll talk about two different things. One will be legal limitations, and then also practical limitations. And because those training courses are 10 to 15 hours, I will not cover all of the legal restrictions. I will just give you a few that you should probably start thinking about and whether it would impact your use of a drone. So you can only fly drones in most cases up to 400 feet above the ground. That is further restricted by airspace restrictions around airports. And it will vary. Some airports are open up to 400 feet. Some airports are open up to certain heights. And when you do the training courses, you'll learn how to read an aeronautical chart where you'll be able to figure out what airspace you're in and what altitudes you can fly to. The aeronautical charts, that's probably one of the biggest reasons to take those training courses. You're not going to look at the aeronautical chart and just know what it says if you take the test. You're going to want to learn how to read those in one of those training courses. After you take the test, though, you probably won't look at an aeronautical chart again. You'll probably log on to AirMap, which is a free service that has converted all aeronautical charts to digital. And you can actually click on it, zoom in, it'll give you a street map or a satellite map. This is going to be much better to figure out if that exact corner of that field you're flying is in restricted airspace. So going on AirMap, we're here in Springfield, and there's these grids of airspace around the Springfield Airport. And we're actually, I think, right up about here. And if I clicked on that, it would say it's restricted to airspace, I just can't fly. So we wouldn't be able to take this outside and fly it legally. If I go block south and click in this cell, it tells me that automatic authorization is available at or below 150 feet. So I can't just take off, but I can submit a flight plan, and I can do that digitally in AirMap. And it will probably come back with an instant authorization as long as my flight plan calls for it being under 150 feet. Not all airports have that. The airport near our study site does not have that. We'd still have to go through a slower process, but it is really handy to have access to that. A couple other legal restrictions that would impact kind of your study design or your management design with a drone. First of all, you must maintain visual line of sight with the actual aircraft at all times. That does not mean with binoculars or a telescope. It means you have to be able to see it with your naked eye at all times. You can have other crew members that help you keep an eye on it, but they can't replace your visual line of sight. So I can't say, well, I'm going to fly it way down there and then you watch it for 5 minutes and then I'll fly it back. They can just provide supplementary viewing, but you have to, as the pilot, keep an eye on it. And that can be big. I set up some automated flights, which we're going to do during a later session. And they flew out to, I think, 1,800 feet. And as much as I squinted, I lost it at about 1,500 feet. So I had to modify the flight plan. We also did some surveys in forested wetlands. And as soon as you go over the trees, you can't see it anymore through the trees. So we had to really modify our study design there, fly much closer to where we could access. We also made use of a provision that will allow you as the pilot to move, even in the vehicle, to keep up with the aircraft, to keep an eye on it. But that's only in very specific rural, away from people, and study site kind of settings. There are going to be institutional regulations. So if you work for an agency or a university, I had a very long set of paperwork, much longer than anything I have to do to fly for the FAA to go through our university to be allowed to fly our studies. If you work for an agency, there's going to be possibly some restrictions there. You cannot take off or land in a national wildlife refuge. So that's important to consider if that's where you're studying. There's a gray area there of, well, what if I take off outside and fly in and land outside? That's up to you, and I guess under your special use permit to talk to the refuge staff. Additionally, you can only fly from sunrise to sunset with a normal out-of-the-box drone. So I know a lot of people want to fly them around at night with infrared and look for things, but you cannot legally do that under a commercial license. If you add approved lighting, you can fly from morning twilight to evening twilight, meaning first light to last light. You still can't fly at night though. You also cannot fly over non-participating people, and participating people means the flight crew. It does not mean there's a bunch of people at a concert, we're gonna fly over them, they know about it, they're cool. It's the actual flight crew. Again, there's many more regulations, but just a few to think about. So we're going to talk about practical limitations now. So I've got a bag. Anybody guess what this bag is full of? It's not cookies, I'm sorry.
Batteries.
Batteries. Batteries are one of the major limitations to flying drones. Particularly rotary craft, which we'll talk a little bit more about. We were trying to do a lot of mapping in a very short period of time, and we get 15 to 23 minutes out of a battery. That includes turning it on, taking off, bringing it back. And that's 23 is pushing it. That's bringing it down to the level that might start to almost damage the battery. They are lithium polymer, So they are very susceptible to damage when they drop below a certain voltage. So with 6 batteries and very careful charging regimen, we were able to get 8 flights in about 4 hours. You have to wait for the batteries to cool down before you charge them. So we'd fly one, wait one more flight before we charge it. And by the time we ran out of batteries, we had 1 or 2 that were charged back up so we could add 2 to the end. Then we ran into the next problem with batteries is everybody thinks about the battery to fly the drone, but the system is electronic also. So the controller started to die on us, and the controller does not have a swappable battery. So you're kind of done unless you have a second controller. And you have a monitor, or a lot of times it's just a cell phone or a tablet, that would start to die. So we rigged up a system that had a 25-foot USB from the truck that would plug into this, and then this USB would charge the phone, and still after 8 batteries, we were starting to get pretty low on both devices. So 8 was really our practical limit without a second controller. You can charge faster if you use a generator instead of 12 volt. And there are some other ways that you can improve it, but that's one thing you're going to need to consider is flight times. Weather is going to be an important factor. There's regulations and common sense behind flying in storms and precipitation. There are regulations about how far you have to be from clouds, and then regulations with fog. If it's extremely cold, the battery life goes through the floor. So if you get 20 minutes out of battery, you might get 12 minutes out of battery. Again, there's things you can do, pre-warming the batteries in the truck and things like that that can help, but they're not going to solve the problem altogether. If it's windy, the drone's going to be struggling to fly and stay in place more, so it's going to consume more battery also. And then you also have to think just about lighting. So when we were doing vegetation surveys, we only flew between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. because we wanted to minimize shadows. As you get these shadows forming above these trees here, that's going to look funny when you start mosaicing images together and tiling them together. And it's going to obscure the vegetation that you're trying to look at. Even if you're in unrestricted airspace and you think, well, we're just going to take off and fly around, think about things that you might impact. So power lines, the first day I learned to fly a drone, we took it off and we're trying to record some video, and we got really close accidentally to some power lines because we were focused on the video here. Even though we're maintaining line of sight, we kind of got a little distracted looking at the video, and next thing you know, there's some power lines and we got a little close. If you disturb some birds, or if they're just flying around, they hit a drone, that could take it down. One of our other operators actually was watching the video and kept seeing it shake. And then he looked at the drone and he realized it was being hit by a hawk. And so he had to put it in what they call sport mode, where you can fly a little faster and free fly it, and zipped it back and brought it back down before the hawk could take it out of the sky. Built structures, buildings, things like that. There's plenty of fail videos on YouTube of people hitting structures and causing damage or just ruining their drones. And also, of course, creating a hazard for people below. And you think, well, they're idiots, they flew into a building. How hard is it to see a building? Obviously, you can get distracted, but there's weird things that happen around structures and power lines with electromagnetic interference. A lot of the operation of these is controlled by GPS and by sensors. So if those start going out of whack, you lose connection to your remote, it flies right into a building. Or there's a weird wind draft around the building, can blow it into the building. So things you got to consider there. And then trees obviously can be an obstruction and cause damage and impact, but they also can obscure your view. So think about that, common sense. If I'm trying to study understory vegetation, a drone's not going to be my best approach in a closed canopy forest, right? I'm going to go out on foot and measure the understory vegetation. So we'll move on to discuss some considerations. Think, okay, we're going to start using drones, and what should we buy? There's a lot of options out there. And they range anything from a mini whoop, which is these little drones that you can fly around, and they use them for cinema, and fly them inside buildings like City Museum in St. Louis and stuff like that, to this is a Gulfstream 3 jet that is actually remote piloted by NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. Obviously, that's not an sUAS, that's a full UAS, and I'm sure the regulations on that are a lot tighter, but goes to show you kind of a full range of things that you could be flying. So first, we'll talk about the platform, the vehicle, the drone, the aircraft. So there's a couple options there, and we typically always think about the rotary craft, because that's what's very popular on social media and things like that, and we see it in the news. But fixed wing aircraft actually have some distinct advantages. They're more aerodynamically efficient, so they can have much longer flight times. You're talking, you know, some of these go 20 minutes, some of the fixed wings will go an hour or two. They have faster airspeed, usually, not always, can handle higher winds, and have less moving parts. There's one propeller to fit on there. There's 4 here, so less things to break. And if, say, the propeller breaks mid-flight, you can glide a fixed wing back down to Earth. Versus a rotary wing, if something happens to that and it's 400 feet up, all you can do is watch. Boom. So some advantages on fixed wings to consider. Of course, the disadvantage, they're a little bit more difficult to fly. It's not as simple as up, down, left, right, spin around like on a rotary craft. And they may need a takeoff and landing area, although there are some solutions to launch them up and then have them level out and fly. But most consumer drones and prosumer drones, which is kind of bridging the gap, are rotary wing, like the 2 we brought in. Obvious advantage is agility. They can hover in place. As soon as you let go of the sticks, it just hovers. So you don't have to freak out, you get nervous, or you almost hit something, just stop. Take a second, the thing will stay in place. That maneuvering can be useful to locate a study species that you're trying to track, and you see it go that way and you want to follow it over there, versus doing a loop around with a fixed wing. Can take off vertically, so you don't need a landing strip. You just need to look up first. People make that mistake a lot. And then, again, easy to fly. It's basically kind of like a video game, but with some more repercussions. You can change, even program the joysticks to fly the way you want, whether you want up to be up or up to be down, etc. And they're popular. So, not just, I don't mean to say that they're cool, but I mean parts are readily available and support's readily available. There's thousands of Mavic 2s out there. There's Mavic 2 forums where I can jump on if I'm having trouble with mine and find somebody who's had the same problem. Whereas if you get a fixed wing, there might be dozens of people in the US flying. And everybody focuses on the drone. Everybody's like, what drone are you going to get? But this is just an aircraft. This doesn't collect the data. The important part is the sensor or the camera. Some of them come pre-made with a built-in camera. Some of the larger units, you can actually attach a full SLR camera if you want to get even higher resolution imagery. So there's things you need to think about, what purpose you're using it for and what sensor you might need to couple with it. So think about resolution. We all know more resolution is better probably, except it takes up more space. But sensor size can be important and how it relates to pixel size. So if you have small sensors packed with pixels, that's different than a large sensor packed with some small pixels. Yes, and I see Ryan over there smiling, so I'll highlight the point here was that if you were studying these foxes, this was taken with a cell phone, this was taken with a beast of a camera, And if we wanted to actually have data about the foxes, the one on the right is going to be better. Never mind which one's a cooler picture. I might give the slant to Ben here. It's pretty good composition there. Look at the lines and everything. So having a good sensor, a good camera is going to be important. You might find two cameras that have the same megapixels and sensor size, but just produce different quality images. There's all kinds of knockoff, cheaply made sensors that purport to have these resolutions. And the algorithms that take the light and convert it into ones and zeros might not be as good. Different coatings on the lenses and stuff like that will make a difference. Some of them offer zoom options. So the Mavic 2 comes in a Pro and a zoom model. This is the Pro, which is 20 megapixels. They sell a zoom option that's 12 megapixels, but has zoom capabilities. For what we were doing, megapixels was more important. We could actually fly lower if we wanted to zoom. But for some other purposes, zooming might be useful. Aperture can be important. Aperture is how much light the lens is letting in, and having a wider range of apertures is going to make it more versatile for flying in low light conditions and adjusting your shutter speed so that you don't get blurry images. The sensor can collect the image with a rolling or a global shutter, and it's complicated, but the simple version is that a global shutter, if this is your sensor, collects everything at once. It collects all the pixels at the same time. Whereas the rolling shutter is scanning what it's looking at. And it does it very quickly, but if you're flying at 30 miles an hour looking down, it starts collecting the image here, and the drone might have moved by the time it collects the image here. So you can get skewing and blur in your images. These have rolling shutters, which is less advantageous. To compensate for that, we just have to fly slower. So there are some workarounds. And then think about spectral range and resolution. So I just keep talking about cameras, but we can outfit a drone with a FLIR sensor to record infrared. We can set it up with a multispectral camera that will collect near infrared for vegetation indices. You see a lot of software offering an NDVI, which is a vegetation index, shows how healthy plants are and things like that. But if you don't have near infrared, it's not really NDVI. It's just how green is it. And then consider also GPS accuracy. If you're trying to produce actual survey grade, legal survey grade maps, you probably are going to have to outfit your drone with an RTK or high precision GPS. And then some other equipment considerations. I used to work in the boating industry, and a lot of my friends would come to me and say, I have $10,000. Help me pick out a $10,000 boat. And the first thing I say to them is buy a $5,000 to $7,000 boat. Because as soon as you buy that boat, you're going to have thousands of dollars of accessories and insurance and things like that, and registration to worry about. So don't blow your budget on the vehicle. This is very true for drones. So I talked about the batteries. This is several $100s with batteries. The display, the armature to hold the display, because they don't really set it up right to do that. Cables, if you wanted to outfit it with a better camera, chargers, etc. Software. So the mapping software we're using runs $2,000 a year. That's as much as the whole drone. So keep those considerations as you're budgeting for a project. And then again, consider institutional or agency restrictions. We talked about some of those earlier, but the Department of Interior did ground Chinese DJI drones. And there is now in Congress a proposed ban on DJI and Chinese drones. These things are collecting GPS information and imagery everywhere we fly them. And DJI is not guaranteed that they're not providing that to the Chinese government. So, something to consider. This ban, I'm sure, is also partly helping stimulate U.S. economy of drone building. And there are some new companies coming out and some existing companies that are improving to compete with DJI, who has like 70 or 80% of the market share. So now we will move on to discuss some methods. And I knew what this was, but several people I showed this PowerPoint to thought this was somebody flying with a drone on their back. This is a scuba diver. And the point of this slide is we don't need to reinvent methods. We've been doing surveys on foot, in the water, and from the sky for a very long time and refining those methods. So think about those methods that we already have. So first of all, we can break the methods down into survey methods, aerial photography, and digital photography. If we talk about survey methods, like I said, we know about transects and point counts. If we think about things like, we should think about things like randomization and stratification. Consider these things that you would consider in any other study. Don't just throw them out the window and fly nimbly bimbly because this thing's cool. Collect relevant data. When we talk about aerial photography, it's been going on for quite a while. This is actually the first surviving aerial photograph taken by Nadar from a balloon. And after that, we started thinking about more ways we could use aerial photography. So there's a whole field in using aerial and satellite photography to tile them and extract information. So you're going to look to that as far as what to do. Again, not just flying around taking pretty pictures, structure it so that you can collect relevant data and process it. For example, you can use one of these to create 3D models of the topography and the vegetation. Everybody thinks about LiDAR. LiDAR is really cool, but LiDAR is expensive. You can fly this around, and if you take pictures that overlap each other enough, you're getting stereo vision. And the software can actually calculate heights of objects from that. And then think about and look into digital photography skills. So I'm trying to learn to be as good as Ryan. And it's a whole, you could do a whole profession studying on how to be a better photographer. But having some basic skills and basic knowledge of how digital cameras work and just cameras in general and how to process images to get better images in the end is going to help improve your work with the drone. Later on, we're going to have a webinar where I've invited speakers from around the world who will come in and talk to us over Zoom meeting, if I can get everything working, and will tell us about their different applications. They've all either invented or studied different things using drones. They're going to give us their perspective, so you don't have to hear from the guy who's only been doing it for a year. But I wasn't able to fit everyone into that schedule, and a few speakers weren't available, so I will discuss some other applications. First is the mapping that I spoke about. So this is imagery from a project we're doing at Burning Star Mine in southern Illinois. So it's a strip pit mine that's bordered with grasslands and prairies and forests. So here you see water, and then the beach leading up into the uplands with the trees and the grasses. These three images are all pretty much aligned. And so this is just the stitched imagery. So this is composed of many photographs that have been tiled together. We flew at 200 feet and were able to achieve, I believe it's 1-inch resolution imagery. So it's better than what you're getting on Google Earth or with your NAPE imagery, your agricultural image. Then that same imagery through the software gave us the vertical structure of the vegetation, and then stripped that out as best it can. It's not perfect, and gave us elevation data. It also gives us a 3D object file, which you can bring into a 3D object viewer and tilt it and turn it and look around. And that was all just flying around, taking the imagery. It was semi-automated using drone deploy. We put in a field and said, these are our parameters, and it applies it for us. We upload it and it gives us all these maps. Drone deploy is about $2 grand a year. Pix 4D is also several thousand. Precision Hawk, but Maps Made Easy, you pay per map instead of a subscription, and maps under a certain size are free. So if you're just trying to look at a couple fields, that might be a consideration. If you'd like to hear more about that, I've got a poster I'm presenting on Tuesday. Come by and talk to me more about that. So we can use drones to find animals, find wildlife and fish. First, I just like to say, do so responsibly. Don't be the idiot who posts a video, drone chasing deer. Represent your profession well. It seems cool to see them, but respect their distance and don't pester them, unless that's the explicit purpose of the mission. So I'll just talk about a couple, or show a couple different examples. I know there are some, who's here is fisheries? Okay, so we have some fisheries people. Unfortunately, waters are gonna be your biggest handicap. If the water's not clear, there's nothing that this can do for you except collect some surface information. But if you have clear water, you can use it to find subsurface structures and animals. So this study by Groves et al. In 2016 actually was comparing drone surveys versus helicopter surveys for locating salmon redds, which are salmon nest sites. And they found that it was more accurate to use drones, 25% more accurate. It was safer, obviously there's not people in the sky, but it was less efficient and more expensive to use drones. So helicopters, as expensive as they are, were actually more cost effective than drones for this project. But you get higher accuracy and safer, so there's some trade-offs there. This imagery is taken this is just sort of incidentally collected while we were doing our mapping, and then we saw some interesting things. So when we were watching it on the live video feed flying around, we actually noticed they don't show up terribly well here, but here's the beach and the lake, and then here's a large school of multiple schools of shad that we could see them moving around, and I've got friends that fish there and have seen the same thing from a canoe, so we're pretty sure that's what that is. And then here we have what I'm guessing are carp, maybe catfish, but probably carp. There's two in this image. This imagery, again, was collected at 200 feet. It's zoomed in, cropped down for the slide. But even at 200 feet, we were able to pick out these carp mudding in the bottom. And then again, another carp kicking up mud, but also we've got a turtle in there. And one of our other operators was talking about he can't believe how well they can find turtles, at least surface turtles, when they're flying a drone. They just stand out really well. And then moving to a terrestrial setting, we can see information. This is from that same imagery at about 200 feet. It's very clear on here where the game trails are. And there's actually a deer in this image, so I'll give you like 15 seconds. It's gonna be really hard. How about I narrow it down? All right, right there is a bedded deer. What's that?
So I had a different deer, but that's all right.
You have another one. You got a stick deer? And I really only found this deer because as we drove out, I saw it bedding there, so I went back to the imagery and looked at it. Otherwise, yeah, that would have been really hard to come across. But if you don't believe me, there's the deer with its back and its ears and head there. So that's 200 feet, incidentally. You can see it is pretty hard to see the deer, so you might consider thermal. You might consider just flying lower. 200 feet was a long way up, if that's your stated objective. Mike here is doing a project looking at surveying ducks at forested wetlands. So you see the dark gray is water, the light gray is branches. And they flew, I believe, at 150 feet. and we're finding and counting ducks. And so we can see a few scattered in here, but they kind of start blending in. If we think back about, I talked about photo editing and knowledge of photos, digital photography. If we edit this image, it gets a little bit noisy, but we start to see these Drake mallards really pop off the screen. If we compare that going back to this where they're kind of muted. So this was just very basic understanding of photography editing and going in and playing with some of the settings. And now we also start to see some of the hen mallards stand out a little bit better. Outfitting a drone with thermal imagery is a great option, but it's important to consider that it operates by finding discrimination in temperatures. So it's the delta degrees, or the difference between an object and its surroundings. So you have to consider things like, if it's an ectotherm, if you're looking for lizards, it might be the same temperature as its surroundings, so it might not show up. If it's well insulated, so if it's a muskox or an eider duck, that the outside of it that you're seeing with the sensor might not actually be as warm as you think it would. You have to consider the ambient temperature, so most thermal images are done at night because the sun hitting the trees and leaves is going to warm them up and obscure what you're seeing. You have to think about obstructions. It's not X-ray. So in this image, they were looking for, I want to say, orangutans or chimps, and they found them in this tree, but you can still see down into the tree a bit. If they were down on the ground underneath crowns of multiple trees, you're not going to be able to see through all of that. The resolution of thermal imagery at the similar price points is substantially less. You go from 4K video cameras to 640 pixel thermal cameras for the same kind of price equivalent. So you're not going to be able to zoom in and see those details. Also, if you're trying to identify things, these aren't going to show you external characteristics of the animal. They're just going to show you a heat signature. So you might consider outfitting with a dual sensor so that you can actually look at that plumage or pattern on the animal to identify it. It's kind of a new frontier, coupling radio telemetry and tracking devices with drones so that you don't have to hike through the swamp to find an otter. You could just fly over the swamp and scan for the otter. There are options being developed and already developed for Yagi antennas and omnidirectional antennas. Later, we will have a talk from Michael Shafer, who will talk about an open source hardware and software option that he's in development with. And we'll also see, Microsoft coupled with a group to set up drones that would scan an area and just fly around. And when they actually picked up a signal, they would turn, fly to that animal, get a visual on it, and collect the data from its tag remotely, and then leave. So there's a lot of cool options. It's not, you're not going to find many out of the box options yet, though.
John, real quickly.
Yep.
So, I mean, just listening to that, that doesn't sound like they had visual sight of that drone.
They were operating in Africa,
Oh.
so the rules were a little different. If there are any rules, I don't know which country they were in, but definitely different regulations. I know at least one of you said you were looking into using drones for wildlife dispersal. And I do know that Hansen Co. tested that at 2 airports in Illinois, one in Central and one in Southern. I haven't seen results, which convinces me it probably hasn't gone very well. It was a few years ago, or you hear more about it. People have been using hobby aircraft for years to try to scare animals off of airfields and landfills and things like that. Sometimes it can help if you make it actually look like a predator or put a audio deterrent. And then one test in Australia was using audio deterrents and strobe lights to scare animals off landfills, and the results were species dependent. Some of them saw a drone and took off immediately, and others they could get 5 feet away and they would just look at it. So I don't know if I have a real promising answer for anyone who's looking to do that, but it's something that's still kind of being explored, and maybe some more efficient options will be figured out. Thermal drones can be very useful for fire monitoring. We will have a speaker talk about what might as well be, as my friend calls them, dragons, because they fly around and shoot fire. So he'll talk about the Ignis system from Drone Amplified. Group in University of Montana with North Dakota and NC State has been studying the behavior of fire. So they actually are taking temperature readings, looking at how fast the fire progresses on the front versus the back, etc., and what kind of controls how a fire is going to progress across the landscape. And it can be very useful for monitoring prescribed burns. I would just say be careful because you're flying over fire, there's embers, there's smoke, there's lots of things that could go wrong. So just obviously if you're using it for that, be extra cautious. And finally, there's some other applications just off the top of the head that you could use, which would be infrastructure monitoring. So if you manage a WMA, you can go out and check some levees that are hard to access or look for beaver dams, etc. If you outfit it with thermal, you'd be able to find possibly leaks, hydraulic leaks under levees. You can use it for search and rescue or disaster monitoring. And this bottom example also in Africa, so varying legalities, is a drone used for enforcement. So they fly around and look for poachers of large animals in Africa. So here you see somebody trying to hide on the ground, but they found them with a thermal drone and somebody with the rifles coming in to apprehend them. All right, we'll go ahead and get started again. So for the next 45 or 50 minutes, we're going to do an interactive section where you'll get to plan a semi-automated flight. So instead of using the joysticks, basically the drone's going to pretty much fly itself for you. We will see how we can preview that mission after we build it in Google Earth and basically simulate flying it. We'll look at how that compares to an actual video. So I have a Google Earth video, and then I have the actual video that was collected. We can compare them side by side. You can see how it does a pretty good job. We will then cut to our other operator at SIU, Gary, who's going to fly. I don't think he's actually going to fly that mission, but he's going to do some flying around in his farm and show a few different things that you can look at for just a few minutes. And then we will take a break at 2:50, and we'll try to start very promptly by 3 o'clock because we have people calling in, and it's a little bit difficult to coordinate all the videos if we're running late. Talking about semi-automated flight, I don't call it, oh, this is acting up, let's see. Well, I'll just tell you about it, it's the last slide. Semi-automated flight, I don't want to call it automated because I want you to think you just push a button and go to sleep and wake up when it's done. You still need to be involved, you still need to watch the drone, have your hands on the controllers. In case something goes wrong, you can take manual control. An advantage that it seems easier, but it's repeating survey identically time after time after time without any variation or very little variation based on the wind. So that's really cool, and I'll show you. We'll see if we can get that off of there. All right, and we will cut to. So this is actually part of the Litchi mission that I'll be showing you, but you guys will get a chance to build your own, or at least start building your own. You can always finish it afterwards. But here they flew the same route in 4 different seasons. And so this is the tail end of fall. And then it's going to just roll right into the starting point of the route again, and it's winter. So they just flew a loop around the lake on our campus, and the video just seamlessly goes from one shot to the next, and it's going to fly the same route. So if you're trying to look at changes in vegetation or repeatable surveys, it's going to be pretty useful. So I'll stop that, and I'll have everyone. Oh, sorry, a few other notes real quick about using semi-automated flight. Be careful. When we're programming in Litchi, we're going to set the first waypoint, and we're going to tell the drone to fly to that first waypoint. And it's going to fly to the altitude that we set and fly there of the first point. But if there's a hill between us and that point, it's going to fly into the hill. So you need to think about some of these things. I would recommend best practice is if you compose a route, fly it in looking at next waypoint mode first. So the drone's always going to be looking ahead as it flies. And you can fly it once, make sure you're not going to hit anything, then go back in and change some of the camera settings. So maybe you're flying sideways or downward or whatever. So it's not thinking about the surroundings, it's doing exactly what you tell it to do. So if it hits something, it's your fault. So go ahead and open Litchi Hub, which is flyLitchi.com or litchi.com/hub. If you don't have a computer, it's fine. I'm going to be doing the same thing up here on the screen. And it's probably going to ask you if it can know your location. If you say yes, it's probably going to show you Springfield. Feel free to zoom out and go to anywhere you want in the world. If you want to fly around the Eiffel Tower or one of your wildlife management areas, go ahead and do that real quick. Because we're going to set up a route to fly around whatever interests us. All right. So there are two major things that we can place on this map. We can place waypoints, which tells the drone where to navigate, or POIs, places of interest. Places of interest are what we can tell the camera to look at. Waypoints are where the drone actually flies. So we have to keep those two separate. If we right-click, it should place a POI. So we're saying this is what we're trying to video or take pictures of. We can change the altitude. Now that is not the altitude we want the drone to fly at. That's the altitude of where we want the camera to look at. So we've got an X, Y, and a Z coordinate, and the camera's going to focus at that intersection of all three. So the X, Y is on the map, and Z is the altitude that we input. So if you want to look at the top of the Eiffel Tower versus the bottom of the Eiffel Tower. If we have that on there, we can set it to whatever height we want and close, and then it's placed. I skipped one step, so we'll go back a little bit. We'll come down here in the bottom left to settings. And this is your mission settings. So this is actually the first step you should do. I just got carried away. This is the default settings for the rest of the mission, and then you can tweak it as you go from waypoint to waypoint. I'm just going to change it to Imperial for mine. And then I talked about having the drone fly the route looking ahead the first time. So that is auto, which is to next waypoint. So the camera is always going to be looking, and the drone's always going to, the drone's always going to be facing towards the next waypoint, flying straight, not flying sideways or backwards. When it's done with the route, we can tell it whether we want the drone to do none, which is just, it's going to stop at the last waypoint and hover. We can tell it to return to home, which is going to tap into the settings of the drone for returning to home. So if you put on a return to home of 100 feet, it's going to fly back at 100 feet. So keep that in mind, that you set that height to a good spot.
Can I tell you one thing?
Yeah.
You learn on return to home.
Yep.
If you run that on a pontoon boat, and I want to float instead. Return to home, may not be where your boat is anymore.
Yes, so what it does
Come
is
back right to that point, you may have floated.
I found the same thing with the roof of a truck. GPS isn't that perfect. Sometimes it misses the roof of a truck. So yes, it takes a coordinate when it takes off, and that's where it thinks it should return home. Land it's going to go to the last waypoint, and it's going to go straight down and land. So you better have something underneath it. Back to 1 will basically go to the start of the route, or it will reverse the route. If you tell it to do back to 1 or reverse the route, then when it gets to the end, it's just going to hover. So you're going to have to assume manual control and land it, because you can't put 2 end modes in. The path, we can do straight lines. So we're going to put a series of points, and it's going to connect lines. And the drone's going to fly to this point, turn, fly to that point. It's going to be very rigid. So if you're trying to record a nice, cool video, it's going to look kind of jerky. You can do curve turns, where it's going to round the curve. So it won't actually hit a waypoint, but it'll sort of round and go to the next one. So for video, that's usually a little bit better. For imagery, you might want the image on that point, in which case you wouldn't want to use curve turns. You can set the default cruising speed. For our drone, we dropped it down to 10 or 11 because of that rolling shutter issue I talked about earlier. And you can set a max flight speed that is the maximum you can put for any individual waypoint. So put 33 if I want for that drone. You can tell it to take pictures at intervals. I'll leave that disabled for now. And you can also set the default curve size. So how sweeping is that curve going to be? And there's just a little bit of artistry to that. You play with that. The gimbal pitch mode is going to tell the gimbal is what controls where the camera is pointing. So the drone turns, but the camera itself can also move up, down, left, and right. So with the gimbal setting, we can tell it to focus the camera and the camera angle on places of interest as it's flying around. So say we want to fly around the Capitol building and we want it to just take video of the Capitol building all the way around, we would put it on focus POI and put a POI for the building. If we're trying to do a mapping project and we want it to just look straight down and keep taking pictures, we would disable that and we would just set the angle down and fly. Interpolate is if the camera setting, gimbal setting at one point is say -20, and then at the next point it's -10, it's going to smoothly bring the camera up on its way to the next point, instead of just going up, fly to the next point. So sort of like rounding curves. And then if you click use online elevation, it will use a digital DEM that they have programmed into it to figure out the elevation. So it's going to know the elevation of where the Capitol building is. So we'll go ahead and click that, and we will, let me just make sure I put all my settings back. Cool. So we have one POI placed already, right? Everybody's got that. Now we will go somewhere else and left click to place a waypoint. And we have a lot more options here. If we wanted to, we could tweak this if we have very specific coordinates. You can also build this in Google Earth or in GIS and import a KML or a CSV file with all those coordinates already in it. So that's what we did for the waterfowl surveys. We went GIS, stratified it, randomized it, then deleted all the points we figured out we couldn't fly because they were too far, we couldn't see the drone, and then flew that. Once we have the coordinates set, we can set the altitude for that point. So how high do we want the drone to physically be at that point? And if we click above ground, it's going to say, instead of flying at 100 feet above sea level, it's going to fly, or 98, let's set it to 100. Instead of flying 100 above sea level, it's going to fly 100 above the ground. And that is assuming that the online elevations are correct. So you always want to double check that. In this case, it seems to be showing me, it shows you both here. I know you can't see it on my screen, but it shows 100 and 100. So it's showing you the sea level and the above ground level. So you want to make sure that those make sense. This is saying 100 and 100. I'm assuming we're not at sea level here, so that's not probably correct. So I want to double check that. The speed you can set to cruising, which is what we already put in the mission setting, or if we wanted to adjust this particular waypoint, we could adjust the speed. There we go. So we wanted to fly slower as we went down this block, we could do that. We could adjust the curve size additionally. Is anybody else able to adjust the curve size? Not letting me, but
No.
no. Okay, it must be because we put it already at a set percentage in the mission control. I think if we had not put curves in, we would be able to manipulate them here. And then you can adjust the heading of the drone. So if we had it in that fly to next mode, we could say, well, in this one, I want you to turn and face south as you're flying. So that's what we would do after we did our test flight. We'd come back in and adjust these angles. And then it asks, which POI do you want the camera to look at? And adjust the gimbal angle. So in this case, we only have one POI, but we'd be able to adjust that if we had set several on the map here. The gimbal, sorry.
If you wanted to set waypoints at different places around the Eiffel Tower, you tell it, take pictures of POI 1 from waypoint 2, 3,
Yep.
4, 5.
So I could create a second waypoint over here, and I could point that to POI 1. So then it's gonna look at POI 1, it's gonna fly to the next point, look at POI 1, and it's gonna continuously do that as it's going around. And if we had done that interpolate, and we had changed the POI to a different one, then it's gonna do that smooth gimbal adjustment. And again, we can't set an interval because we already put that in the mission control. We didn't want to do those. Then down here we get to actions. So at a given waypoint, we can tell it to do something at that waypoint. So we might have already set the video to record when we started. And so since this is our waypoint, we would want to turn the video on. So we would say start recording. Pretty simple. When it gets to waypoint 1, it's going to start recording, and then it's going to record until we tell it to stop at another waypoint. If we wanted it to take a picture, we'd have to, if this was a subsequent waypoint, we'd have to stop recording, take a photo, and start recording. So we were flying, we were recording video, we hit this point, we actually want a picture now. We take a picture, and then we start the video again, and we resume the flight. Additionally, you can tell it to stay in place for a certain number of seconds. You can tell it to tilt the camera, rotate the aircraft. So you have all these different options, and you can create this actions sort of protocol that it's going to do when it hits that waypoint. So that's pretty much it. You go through and you just start clicking. Now I've got a second waypoint, and I can do the same settings or different settings, and it's going to fly from waypoint to waypoint to waypoint. You'll eventually export this. You'll save it. So this is called Litchi Mission Hub, which is free. You can compose routes for free. To actually use them, you got to buy an app. It's $20 to $30, whether you're on Android or iOS, to download it to your phone, and then there's no additional fees after that. So if you save it on here through the cloud, make sure you do it before you go out into the boonies, if you don't have signal. open the app, you'll see your missions on there, and you can select the mission that you want. You can also export as a CSV or a KML 3D path. I'll give you guys a couple minutes to kind of click around and try a few things, and then we will do a different option to export a KMZ that isn't listed here. Yes?
Can you do this from the app?
You can also, you also can do it in the app. You definitely can. And in that, so drone deploys, that other software we use, it was like $2,000 a year, same thing. It's just easier to do on a computer. But then if you get out in the field and you need to make adjustments, or none of our drone deploy missions would fly because of a problem with GIS, we sat out there and just got on a phone and punched them in and got them to work. So we didn't have to go back to the office. So you can do that with the Litchi app. So go ahead and click around and try a few things. If you guys have some questions, just get my attention. And then in just a few minutes, we will look at another cool thing that we can do with this to sort of pre-fly our missions. Huh?
Yeah. Hey, even bigger than that.
What's that? Yeah. Did you look them up?
Told us that his work extension is
I better check my email, make sure somebody's emailing me. There's issues.
Yeah, nobody's lost. But I'm for veteran trailer. So there's a here.
All right. So I've got a Litchi mission here that we pre-built and has actually been flown. So I'll show you this one. You can work with the one you've started creating if you'd like. I think that this one was in the Google Drive as a CSV and a KML. So you are also welcome to try to open it or just follow along on the screen. So this route goes around our campus lake at SIU. It's the video I showed you earlier. And it's already been set up with the elevations and the points of interest. If I would like to fly this without having to actually go out and fly it, I can export it as a CSV, and it will download the CSV file. Then we open Virtual Litchi Mission, which was a software package that's also on the Google Drive, and I'll keep that drive up for a while in case you weren't able to download that stuff. You can still get access to it, or you can just search for Virtual Litchi Mission and download it. And we basically what this is kind of a patch to a go-between between Litchi and Google Earth. If we were to export a KML from Google Earth, it's just basically going to show us a line on Google Earth. This will actually incorporate a lot of that data that we put in as far as gimbal angles and elevations, altitudes, and show that to us in Google Earth. So it's pretty simple to use. You open CSV file and you find the CSV file of interest and tell it to open. And that's it. It's pretty simple software to use. I'm sure there's some other nuances after that. And it will open the file in Google Earth for you. I am going to turn off some of that noise. We can keep the waypoint markers on. But what is really cool is, sure, we can go in here and see where our waypoints are. But if we actually go up to where there's a little camera up here that says Virtual Mission, we can double click on it and it will fly the mission at the appropriate altitudes and camera angles for the drone. You can see there's a waypoint coming up, and now it's going to focus on the POI, which is the boathouse. Because this is in an area that has been mapped by Google Earth in 3D, we also can make sure that we're going to clear most of the trees. Again, I would still go fly this and keep an eye on the drone because this isn't perfect, but it'll give you a pretty good idea of what your shots are going to look like. And it's just going to go around the whole loop and show all that to you. So it's really easy. If you've already built it in Litchi, pretty easy. If you're flying somewhere out in the country where there's no 3D, you're going to be flying around, turning and panning and tilting on a flat Earth. You're not going to see any of the structure sticking out. So it looks a little funny when you do that. I think I actually have an example here. So this is at Gary's farm where he'll be flying later. This is a mission that he had set up prior. And you can see it's just two-dimensional, so it doesn't really give you a great feel, but it's still going to give you an idea of if your shots are lining up with the targets that you were aiming for. So if we restart this campus lake one again, you see it sort of starts over the beehive structure, and it's going by these dorms and or buildings, and then looking at the boathouse. Then, just to prove to you it works pretty well, we can go to the campus lake tour video, and here's where the drone recorded. So this is the route that comes set up. It does seem like it's a little bit lower than the trees, so that's why I said to the trees. So of course, be careful. And it does run a little bit faster in the video, I think, than in the Google Earth. So it's not perfect mesh up if you put them side by side. But it's going to give you a very good idea of what you're looking for. So I'd advise you always just pre-fly your missions if you build them, just to make sure that they're going to do what you want. You might find out that you set an action wrong, and the drone gets to the end and doesn't return to home, or takes off and goes. You had an errant waypoint that you forgot about. So it's always worth double checking that. Does anybody have any questions about using Mission Hub while we're waiting for that to load? Or general questions from the course so far?
So I do have a question, John.
Yes.
You had talked about there being, it freaks out when you load it in there, you take it out, you test it, and you had a point in there that you just forgot about. I assume there's a way to override the system as it's deciding to go all the way to Timbuktu.
Yep, depending on which software or which app you're using to fly the drone, because all of these you're going to load an app to your phone or the display for the controller. And Litchi has a pause restart option. So you don't like what it's doing, you can just hit pause, regroup, okay, restart. If you don't want to restart because it's buggered and you want to just bring it back home, there's a return home button. Or if you say, well, no, we were flying this route, but then we saw this huge deer run by and we want to go check out that deer or something for our study, you can just flip a switch on the remote. There's like a physical switch on the remote on the side. There's 3 different modes. There's a sport mode, a tripod, and a position mode, at least on a DJI. And you would switch it to sport mode, which would kick it out of the app, and then you'd have manual control. You still, while it's flying around, are going to have the video feed coming through Litchi. And I talked just about these flights that you can kind of compose in Mission Hub, but the app itself has all kinds of other cool features for video of following something or a person, or you can put in an object and it will orbit around it without having to sit there and create all the waypoints. Those are less applicable, I think, for wildlife. They're useful for PR or for YouTube hits. But you do have that option to take manual control at any time. We definitely had to do that with drone deploy a number of times because drone deploy will actually give you an idea of battery. So you compose a route and it says it'll take this number of batteries and it'll take this long to fly. But wind and other things will affect that, or maybe the battery was at 97%. So there was definitely times where we had to just take manual control, bring it in and land it. We didn't want to trust return home because we were in a truck or we had a pad this big in a field with corn stalks around, and we wanted to make sure to land it manually so it could actually hit the pad. Yeah, so you do have options there. Litchi will not give you any idea of batteries. It will, I think, give you a flight time. It's a rough estimate, but it's not going to say, it will let you program a route that will take more than a battery, and it will fly until the battery dies, or the automatic settings, the sort of foolproof settings in the drone take over and bring it back. Were there any other questions? No?
There isn't an option to like mitigate the turnaround and come back when it starts getting too low.
There is. That's what I was saying about sort of the foolproof settings. Say to trust in your pool, like definitely keep an eye on everything. But Litchi runs sort of through the DJI app, and in the DJI app, you set your return to home settings. So you can tell it to return to home if it loses signal, or return to home if the battery gets below, and you can actually adjust that. So there's some consumers that will go and drop those settings down to 3% so they can maximize the use of the air. Getting below 8% is really damaging to the batteries. You're paying $100, $200 for the batteries, and if you keep dropping them to 3%, you're in trouble. Return to home is not foolproof because it basically calculates how fast your drone will fly and how far it is away, and assumes how long it needs to get back at a certain setting, but it doesn't factor for wind and things like that. So don't trust those perfectly, but there are some sort of settings that if something goes awry, usually it will recover the drone for you. I've only had 2 crashes. Both were in fields away from people, so it wasn't a big deal and it didn't cause any real damage. Both of them were by exceeding the protocols. One was a drone deploy field, and it was the end of the day, and it was almost going to finish the field on that battery, and I didn't have any more batteries, so I was like, let's just push it. And then it was a long way away, flew it back, and in the DJI app, I had set at a certain point not only return to home, but force land when the battery gets low enough. So I was positioning it over the truck, and it hit a threshold and force landed, hit the door of the truck, flew into the cab, and crashed on the floorboards. Broke a propeller, but that was it, so that was good.
So you can do that on Facebook.
Okay. Well, I'm not like friends with them and everything on Facebook, so we'll.
Just a message.
All right. Well, we'll just break. And the other crash was somebody took the landing pad out of the truck. Somebody borrowed the truck, took the landing pad out. It was like, okay, I'll just land in this cornfield, and just one prop just clipped the corn stalk, and the whole thing flipped and basically flew upside down, downward. So that was minor. That was, it was already put off the ground. But again, just the protocol was always have a landing pad. So there's a reason why you kind of set that up, because it is when you push it or do something outside the norm that's when you're going to have crashes.
All right, so I assume that you can hear me. John, if you can maybe give me a thumbs up if it's okay, if the sound is all right. Okay. All right, so I thought I will just quickly say who I am. My name is there on the screen, Deon van der Merwe. I'm originally from South Africa. I was born and raised there. And then I moved to the USA to do a PhD, and I sort of got stuck there and lived there for many years. And then 2 years ago, I moved to the Netherlands. So when people ask me what I am these days, I say I'm an American with South African roots living in Europe. But it was at Kansas State University that I started using drones. And something I want to just emphasize is that none of the things that I will say here happened in a vacuum. I was lucky enough to really be working with lots of colleagues, students, many of whom became colleagues later on. Many people I worked with became good friends as well. So the stuff that I'm talking about is really the result of a lot of people's effort. So I thought what I'd do is I will just point out some applications, because 10 minutes is very short. Some applications that I thought might be things that other people will probably not talk about. and then also things that I think might relate more to fish and wildlife kinds of issues. So this is one application, mapping of poisonous plants. You know, since I am a veterinary toxicologist in my day job, this is something that is particularly interesting to me. This is a poisonous plant that is very problematic in southern Africa. And one of the questions was, can you map it efficiently? And this is just a demonstration of that. And the key here, and this is something that is often very important, is the timing. So what you see, especially when you try to look at things that are seasonal in nature, like plants, you tend to get better results at one part of the year versus the other. So in this particular plant, if you do it in spring, if you take images in spring, because it's a very early greening plant, it really sticks out like a sore thumb. If you do it later in the year, then you can hardly see these plants. So the next application that I think is kind of interesting from a wildlife point of view is making use of information about the dispersal of an organism. So in this case, this is from Zambia. We were looking at cornfields, but in those cornfields, you actually see the remains of these giant termite heaps, termite mounds. These things can be as big as houses, and when they make something like a cornfield, they actually don't plow the thing completely under. You can still see, when you do a digital surface model from drone imagery, you can still see those mounds. So what I did here was I mapped out the mounds and then did a calculation in GIS software to give me a sense of what the dispersal pattern is. And from that, you can deduce some things that are useful about the biology of organisms. So in this case, because the termites are trying to be as far away from each other as possible to limit the amount of competition between them, then you get a distributed pattern. So they try to be as far away from the next termite mound as possible. And if you compare that to a different type of termite, this is Trinorbitormes, which is in South Africa. This is a termite mound distribution that is random in nature. So you can do that same calculation, then you get a randomness to it. And the reason that this appears to be random is that the termite mounds are very frequently attacked by aardvarks. So it's a mammal that can break into those termite mounds and really devastate them sometimes to the extent that they don't get repaired. They just become dormant. And then the termites are, of course, free to go and build a mound somewhere else. So the distribution of the mounds is not completely controlled by competition, but also by this dormancy that you get. So now you get a more random distribution pattern. This is another similar example, this time looking at something in Utah, in the US, looking at creosote bushes. And there is a hypothesis that creosote bushes should actually disperse in the same manner that we have with the termites, because they compete with each other through chemical interaction through the root systems. So they also try to disperse, in a sense, as far away from their neighbors as possible. So the question here was, can we distinguish that? And yeah, you can. So it's fairly easy to distinguish those bushes in a sort of sparse vegetation area like this, where the two main types of vegetation or main types of plants that you get there are the creosote and then also range rhatany. And the range rhatany has a very high level of blue pigments in it, so you can easily distinguish it. And then you can map the creosote, and then you also get that dispersed distribution pattern. And now on to something very different. Here, still in South Africa, but we're looking at a crocodile farm. And the question here is, can we determine useful information about crocodiles using photogrammetry from drones? So you take pictures from drones, you analyze the data from those pictures to get a sense of how long the crocodile is, how wide it is, from that you can calculate the weight. And then you can also, because the sex of the crocodile is related to the relationship between the length of the skull and the width of the skull, you can actually then calculate if it is a male or a female. So in a sense, you can determine if it will lay eggs. So here is a orthomosaic, of many images taken together, 87 images taken from a height of 50 meters and then processed into an orthomosaic. And then when you do the calculations, so you can measure actual distances on the ground, then you can achieve with this altitude of flight and the camera system that we use there, and this is typical for the drones that we currently have, a maximum error of less than 2 centimeters, which means that it is good enough that you can actually get useful management information about crocodiles, as well as calculate if they are male or female. And then I'm going to move on to something that we're doing more recently in Kansas. We're involved in trying to assess the biomass of prairie grass, but the kicker here is that it has to be in the dry season. So the reason is that in Kansas, we have a typical spring burn. So every spring, a lot of grass gets burnt to prepare the prairie for the coming growing season. And that burn process causes issues with air quality. So if too many fires burn at the wrong period of time, so that the smoke blows across cities especially, then we get issues with air quality affecting human health. So in order to try and avoid that, there is a burn model that has been developed for Kansas. So it takes into account various parameters, things like humidity, temperature, wind direction and speed, but also the amount of material that's there to burn, because that relates to the amount of smoke production. So something that has been done in the past was to basically populate this model by calling county agents, extension agents, and asking them, do you have high, medium, or low biomass this year? And then that gets taken into account in the modeling. So the question was, can we do it better? And yes, you can. So you can actually go around and clip samples of grass and weigh it. And that way you can get much better data, better quality data, but it is a lot of effort. It takes a long time, and therefore it is also relatively expensive. So the question is, can we improve that so we get a better quality data, but with less effort, less time involved? So this is a method that we came up with. So we fly one of the most common drones, the Phantom 4 Pro in this case, and we set out samples, so sampling sites, 1 square meter sampling sites, and we use normal buckets that we buy from Home Depot. So these 5-gallon buckets that we place on the corners of our sample sites to give us an indication of what the ground level is. So the bucket is turned upside down with a rim on the soil so that you know that that is a reference of the soil height. So then, because the buckets are of known height, we can use that to calculate the soil height, and then we can use the soil height as the difference between the canopy height of the vegetation to give us a sense of what the volume of grass is that's there. So this is just a demonstration of one of those flights that we did. So we went about to several counties within the Flint Hills of Kansas, and we tested those sites. So we did clippings as well as flights. And from that, we developed a regression model. And then the question was, okay, if we apply this regression model, so this relationship between the canopy height of the vegetation and the biomass that we derive from the drone, if we use a regression model developed like that on other sites, how well will it perform? So we did 2 sites as validation, and there you can see we got an R squared at one of those sites of 0.9, and 0.74 at the other site. So pretty good performance, especially if you think about biological systems like this, which can be relatively messy. Getting R² values like those are actually incredibly good. So then the question is, how far can we apply this? So the next phase of this project is going to be to see if we push it out of the Flint Hills region, if we still can apply the model. Now, it probably will not work as well when you go to other regions. You might have to develop a spatial regression for other types of vegetation, but at least it looks very promising for this application. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about something that's related to the biomass project, and that is assessing the actual quality of the smoke that comes off of these prairie burns. So this is one example that we did in April of 2018. So there you can see a drone with a bunch of sensors on it. Two of the important sensors that I'm going to discuss here are ozone, which is an air quality issue, and then also small particles, so PM2.5, the 2.5 micron diameter particles. So you can see two of the flights, we can see is you get a sense of where the drone was in two-dimensional space, and the color indicates the concentration of ozone and the particles on the right side. So you can get a sense for where the smoke was perhaps thickest and so on, but you can also, because you have the three-dimensional position of the drone, you can then also get a sense for what happens as the smoke column rises above the surface. So you can see, when you look at the particulates, it's kind of interesting that the highest concentrations of particulates stay relatively low in elevation, so altitude above the ground. And if you compare that to ozone, then you see as you go up into the smoke column, for as high as we did, so we went up to about 450 meters in this study, you can see that the ozone concentration remains high in that smoke column. So this then becomes useful information for modeling air quality issues from prairie burning. So that was a short sort of whirlwind through a couple of applications. So I went through that fairly quickly in order to hopefully be able to answer some questions.
Deon, this is Kevin. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Kevin.
Oh, I was hoping you'd talk something about the blue-green algae.
Yeah, so yeah, something that I worked on at Kansas State University as well, also because of my interest in toxicology in general, is toxic algal blooms. So toxic algal blooms is something that is an increasing problem throughout the world, actually, but very much so also in the United States, especially the Midwest region, as many people are aware of or becoming aware of. So the question is, to what extent can you actually map the density of algal blooms using drones? And yeah, we've done quite a bit of work on that. We've done some publications. Bottom line is, yes, you can do that. There are some limitations, some specific practical considerations. So for
So I'm Michael Shafer. I'm from Northern Arizona University. Thanks for inviting me to speak to you guys today. I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that we've been working on for a little while using unmanned aerial vehicles in order to do some wildlife radio telemetry. So we've been trying to build this system for a few years and get it published so that other people can use time today to run through this. So this is the slide stack that I've kind of modified and tried to, so I'll try to cook through this as fast as possible. I've got a couple of collaborators here, but I just want to move on so we can get start talking about this stuff. So a big problem with wildlife radio telemetry is just the cost and time to actually do the tracking. It's a huge manual labor time problem. And for small wildlife in particular, you're really constrained to using these very small radio telemetry devices that use very high frequency radio transmissions. And some of you there may be familiar with these tags. They emit a little short radio burst on the order of like once every second, and they're little 20 millisecond chirps that go out, and then typically a field ecologist or a technician would go out and listen using a directional antenna or an omnidirectional antenna and use a handheld radio and just use their ears to try to pick these tags up, and then kind of and then slowly kind of track the animal and try to get closer in once they get an initial detection. And so what they typically do are doing an initial detection or discovery where they're asking, is it in the area? And then they go through this kind of sequence of doing a long range localization and then kind of medium range where they're getting in closer. And then on some species, they may actually want to walk up on the animal if it's a burrow or if they're looking for a tree roost or something. And so we've been working with an ecologist at Northern Arizona University who works on bats, Carol Chambers. And myself and a colleague, Paul Flickema, who's an electrical engineer, started to talk to her about the potential to integrate one of these radio systems in with the drone. And this is the core kind of concept: is we can get one of these antennas up on the vehicle, and then try to basically vacuum the radio data down while the vehicle's up and flying around, then process that in some way that allows the user to then kind of cycle through that same kind of discovery, long range and short range localization, but allows them to move their antenna much more freely and much more quickly over the terrain. So in the US, we have a 400-foot ceiling regulation, so that kind of limits how high we can fly. But even, getting that antenna up off the ground is a huge boon in terms of the signal reception, received signal to noise ratio, because once you're up off the ground, you're mostly just dealing with free path loss rather than having all the ground clutter in the way. And so it really increases the signal strength that we pick up. And so what we've been trying to do is, integrate what's known as a software-defined radio, which is, I don't really have too much time to get into, but with the flight controller we have flying on our vehicle, and then have software then that can do the detections and do the kind of pulse, the pulse processing to figure out where that animal is. So this is what our vehicle looks like in flight. That little blue box on the top has got our computer on it and a little radio. The antenna's down there mounted on the bottom. You can see those. It's an H antenna. It's got those flexible elements, which is important because you do. Everybody who has flown a drone knows that landings don't always go as smoothly as you might hope. And so we send that up, and we can change the orientation of that antenna. And I'm going to show you that in just a moment. So this is the core, the core electronics of our system. We have it kind of starts with a radio tag that would be on the vehicle, on an animal, that little radio tag, and that you can see that coin cell battery there on the left hand side. That's the kind of scale of the tags that we're working with on some of these really small animals. They do use VHF tags on larger animals as well, because they're about an order of magnitude cheaper than these little VHF, or than equivalent GPS tags, and tags that would communicate with satellite resources. So we have the flight avionics on the vehicle that basically fly the vehicle. We put in a predetermined flight plan, and then we have the radio telemetry avionics, which is composed of a small a software-defined radio that receives in the radio data, digitizes it, down converts it, and then gives it to our onboard processing computer, which is just a small Linux single board computer. You can think about it, for those of you guys have heard of a Raspberry Pi computer, it's kind of like a souped up Raspberry Pi. And then we can download that data over a Wi-Fi link and we can communicate with the vehicle via these radio telemetry links that we have. This is kind of what our software looks like. We have, this is some software we've written in actually MATLAB, but we can deploy it on and install it on other computers. And it effectively, it allows us to both connect to the vehicle. I'm not showing all of the different tabs that we have available, but you can connect to the vehicle, start the system up, set all your parameters like what tag frequency you're looking at, radio gains, the pulse durations and repetition rates for the tag you're looking at. And then you can send the vehicle up, collect the data, come back down, process that, or download that data from the vehicle, process it, and then map it all in one application. And this is a test of a flight I'm going to show a little bit later. This is actually what the interface looks like on the right-hand side after we've processed that data. So you can get that in the field. And because it's this rapid kind of collect data and then process the data and then decide where to either move or not move, depending on where that animal may or may not be. And so this is the basic, core flight logic that we're working with right now, is where you might plan an automated flight mission. You start up your UAV-RT. We call it the UAV-RT, UAV radio telemetry system. You fly the vehicle, you land the vehicle, offload the data, which takes a couple of seconds, process the data, which is just not much more than just a few button clicks. And then that allows you then to, on the map that you just have in front of you, then create a new flight plan in response to that. Or potentially just walk up on the animal, depending on where you figured out it may or may not be. So we typically fly a directional antenna that's got a gain pattern that kind of gives us a direction, and we can use, we've developed something that's based on principal component analysis to try to figure out, if we get the vehicle spinning in place and we've collected a whole bunch of data points, what direction is that tag coming from? And so here's some example data that we have, where we had a series of pulses on the right-hand side here. And we use our principal component analysis to get a bearing estimate, which is this blue arrow. And then we've got this red arrow, which was the actual true bearing to the tag for that particular waypoint that we had flown to. And so here's some example data where 3 waypoints we flew to, and we spun in place at each one of those waypoints. These colored orbs are kind of the size of or the strength of the pulse. Those are related to the strength of the pulses we were receiving. And at each one of these apexes, these triangles, we can get those bearings from that principal component analysis. So from these, we had 2 bearings that weren't very good. The signal strength was really low, but we had a fairly strong signal here coming out in this direction. And this was a test we had done. We had planted this, a tag over here in this forest somewhere, but this was just a test of kind of how we would go about using these flight algorithms. So generally, you might say, okay, we've got some amount of error there. Let's design a flight plan that might fly over that region and try to figure out, do a better localization. So what we can then do is take our directional antenna and actually point it down at the ground and do more or less kind of a scanning, almost like you were doing some photogrammetry or something where you're actually pointing a camera at the ground. But in this case, we're looking for radio telemetry pulses. So this is the flight plan I kind of generated on the fly while we were out in the field. And I would have flown over further, but just off this map, there's a road here, and I didn't want the vehicle flying over the road. I was out by myself that day, so I was being a little conservative about how far I flew the vehicle. And this is one of the first few flights I did without my grad students that had recently graduated, so I was still a little bit hesitant to have the thing fly too far off from me. So, but these legs, you can see this was about a little bit less than half a kilometer away that I was flying the vehicle, or it was really flying itself. So let's take away that map to really just show the flight plan here. And this long vertical line is the vehicle just kind of flying, or this diagonal line is it flying back. And you can see we're just doing these kind of transects, and then we had the vehicle fly back. That was on the return portion of the flight. So if we overlay now the pulses, each one of these is a radio pulse that we received, and our software then detected. And once again, the diameter and the colors were indicative of the strength of that pulse that we received. And so you can see here that it's obvious that it looks, I mean, I don't know if it's obvious, but it looks like we had flown right over the tag here. We've got nice, strong signals that are much, much higher than the pulses that we were receiving elsewhere during this flight. It's interesting to note, though, you can see that on this kind of second to last transect, can you guys see my mouse? I don't know if there's okay, I'm getting a thumbs up. Okay, great. So as you can see here that with a signal strength increase, and then it drops off again, and then it picked back up again. And then we came around to this other side, and we got a signal strength increase. It drops off and then comes back up again. And the actual tag was right there, and the estimated position was right. Actually, I'm sorry. The true position was this ring right here, and the diamond was the estimated position. And we had about we were off by about 22 meters. We did what's known as a kind of a center of mass calculation to figure out where this tag was, but we were off by about 6%, and that percentage is based on kind of how far away we were flying from the vehicle. But we got in pretty close from that. So our tag was mounted into this tree right here, and its antenna, you can see in this upper right-hand image, was oriented vertically. And these antennas have these kind of nulls that come out of the top of the antenna, and that's actually what we were seeing as this antenna, the signal strength dropped down, is because we were flying right over the end of this antenna where the signal, the radio, or the propagated power actually drops off pretty significantly at the end of one of these antennas. And so that's kind of what we were seeing. So we've got a paper out on this in Methods in Ecology and Evolution, if you want to read some more about that. That came out in October of last year. We have assembly instructions and materials on how to build this system and operate it at uavrt.nau.edu. And there's some our GitHub repository and some videos on our YouTube page. So I think I'm going to, I don't know if we have enough time for questions, but I think, well, I'll leave it at that and take some questions and try to run through that as quickly as I could.
Lovely. Okay. So we are a little bit behind this schedule. I will try to make my presentation as short as possible so that you can go back to track. I'm not sure whether John introduced me. I'm Monica Rivas. I'm based at Cranfield University in UK. I'm a senior lecturer in integrated environmental monitoring. I'm also the environment program director at Cranfield. And I just want to give you a snapshot of some of the research that we are doing on drones back in UK. So the project that I'm presenting today is just looking at river assessment, hydromorphological assessment, and looking at the complexity of the habitats within the river. Our question that we were trying to address was whether drones could be used and could be useful to be able to map river features that were of interest for us. What has been happening in the last few years is that environmental legislation has been developed all across Europe to protect some of these features, and current methods that rely in situ mapping or aerial imagery collected from either aircraft or satellite imagery is not sufficiently good to be able to analyze all the features that we are interested in. So what we did is try to select a case study area, which is located in England. The case study area is in the River Dee, so you can see it is in Wales up there, and it's a stretch that is approximately 1.5 kilometers long, that has multiple features, river features that we are interested in. We had a long campaign, a surveying campaign within that area, which involved the deployment of 60 ground control points, 1 meter by 1 meter, and you can see them on the screen here. We also had 25 checkpoints, which are the yellow ones that you can see there as well, 1 meter by 1 meter. Measurements taken with RTK GPS at the centroid of each of these ground control points and checkpoints, as well as some additional measurements taken with other sensors, in that case ADCP records, taken within the river to get information about the bathymetry of the site. I'm going to go now into a little bit of detail about the drone. The drone that we used was Falcon 8 Trinity model from Ascending Technologies. The octocopter is quite large for an octocopter. It's very reliable. We have vertical takeoff and landing with a weight of 1.9 kilos, and the endurance of the battery is approximately 22-25 minutes in good conditions. The drone cannot operate in very gusty conditions, so we are talking about 15 meters per second, but it was selected for this particular mission because it can generate high resolution imagery, really good quality. It's very stable, so it can hover in areas that we require to map with more interest. It has a high precision when it comes to repeated measurements and the use of GPS. It has a very stable gimbal and a very good camera. It has an excellent camera, the Sony Alpha 6000. And just for you to have a look later on, I have just copied the characteristics of the camera in this slide. So when you have the time, you can dedicate a little bit of detail. You can look into a little bit of detail into this slide. What we managed to do at the end of the day was 4 flights within the area. This is the river that we mapped. The procedure was quite challenging for multiple reasons. We had steep banks. We had to access the area, find the right deployment points. We also had to deal with unexpected features. So, for example, we had cows that decided to eat the ground control points. So we had to place them again, move the cows. So in terms of logistics, it was quite challenging to make sure that we liaise with the landowners and we make sure that everything was preserved from an environment point of view, but also from an equipment point of view, so it was not chewed by the cattle. The steps that we follow was the deployment of the ground control points, flight performance, then deployment of the drones, the measurements of the ground control points, their locations, and then an additional survey where we were identifying the features visually in the river so that we had some kind of validation data set that we could use later on after the development of the machine learning algorithms that we used to identify these features from the imagery. We follow a standard photogrammetric process, just stitching over 1,000 images for the area. The overall survey took 10 hours. And the data processing in itself was quite demanding, CPU and time consuming. And at the end of the day, what you can see there is the final image with the different ground control points and checkpoints identified in the area. Moving swiftly into what we did with the data, we then started developing an artificial neural network from which we trained the network to identify these specific features from the imagery. We were looking at different characteristics such as erosion, bars, grass. We were looking also at submerged vegetation. And the example that you have in here is a artificial neural network trained to identify submerged vegetation. Sorry, emergent vegetation. Actually, you can see the detail of the vegetation here, and everything that is highlighted in pink is the artificial neural network being able to pick up the feature that corresponded to emergent vegetation. So you can see that it's working quite nicely. In terms of features that we identified, I have summarized them on these tables, and you can read later on what the description refers to. We had sidebars, erosion, riffles, deep waters, shallow waters, and also we had trees, vegetated sidebars, vegetated banks, submerged free-floating vegetation, emergent free-floating vegetation, and grass. At the end of the day, what we managed to do is using the drone imagery at 2 centimeters resolution and this artificial neural network, we managed to map all the different features within the river and identified all the features that were described in the table for the 1.4 kilometers that we did the survey for. Jumping now into the conclusions, the artificial neural network had an accuracy of 81%. We had over 2,000 points for validation taken with the GPS. So the data set used for the assessment of the accuracy was quite comprehensive. The overall framework that we presented with the drones enabled us to identify these hydromorphological features and enabled us to have an approach that could compare different ways of hydromorphological assessment of rivers. It gave us as well a transferable approach across countries, an approach that was unbiased and flexible based on artificial neural networks and drone data. The drones proved to be a very cost-effective tool to gather the high-resolution imagery that we needed for this. We also highlighted the fact that the deployment of 60 ground control points perhaps was excessive. A lower number would have been sufficient to achieve what we really needed, thus increasing the cost effectiveness of the overall assessment. And as I mentioned through the presentation, the flight missions required quite considerable logistic and planning effort in collaboration with the landowners to make sure that everything was carried out successfully. So I think we have spent the last 10 minutes talking about hydromorphology. Any questions perhaps later on, John? I let you decide what to do next.
All right, well, my name is Bradley Scholten. I'm an undergraduate student at Calvin University. And I worked with drones a little bit this summer. This is just a brief overview of what I'll talk about today. We'll talk a little bit about my experience. And then we'll look at a couple of different uses for drones in research. A lot of them you've heard about already and you're probably familiar with. And then we'll focus a little bit more on a thermal imagery study that was done by my mentor and some of my colleagues. So a little bit of my experience with drones. I got my FAA certification about a year ago. And for my study, what I did this summer was we looked a little bit into whether or not drones cause a stress response in tree swallows. So my study wasn't directly involved with like a new method for using drones, but rather the impact of using drones in research. So that's why today I'm going to talk about a couple of different studies and different methods as well. So there's a lot of different methods or things that drones can be used in research for, as you've already heard about. So one of the most common ones is for counts. In this picture here, that's actually a greater crested tern colony. So the study actually flew a drone above the colony and used the drone footage to actually look at the total number of greater crested terns there. There's plenty of other studies that do similar work like that. So another study I looked at, you did that with a seal colony, as well as there's been other studies, kind of like one of the other presenters mentioned, where they actually flew a drone above manatees and they were able to measure the length of manatees. So that was similar to the alligator study with that too. And then a lot of different studies have been using them to track marine mammals like whales and dolphins and stuff like that. A different method would be like for habitat mapping and tracking. Again, we talked about this a little bit before too. For this study here, they actually flew a drone over a forest in Costa Rica to look at its recovery. I think it was after a fire. With the drone and I think it was a LiDAR program they were using, they were able to measure canopy height and then canopy biomass as well as canopy cover too. And they can do that over time. So that's another brief method, way to use drones in research as well. And then there's more specific things that they've used drones for. So for this study, they were searching for the ivory-billed woodpecker. This is a pretty rare woodpecker. It was thought to be extinct. And there were some relatively recent sightings of it in like the past 5 to 10 years. But essentially with this study, what they did was they flew the drone over, it was more of a very dense forest that's known to be its habitat. So kind of hard to walk through and also wet too. So they use the drone to fly above the forest and kind of look for its habitat. It tends to target certain types of bark on trees since it has a really long bill. So they searched with the drone on trees to actually see if they could find those areas where the woodpecker would be. Overall, they weren't successful in finding it, so we're still not sure if it's extinct or not. But and then we'll talk a little bit about thermal imagery. So this is kind of a precursor study to what my mentor did with some of my other colleagues. So for this study here, they actually used a thermographic imager to go along and try to find grassland bird nests. They found that there's good success with that, and so my mentor thought, well, what if we just throw the thermal imager camera on a drone and use the drone to actually search for grassland bird nests? And that's essentially what they did. So for this study, they put a thermal imagery camera on a drone. So they used the DJI Inspire 1 drone for the Zen-Use XT thermal camera. And then they effectively had 3 teams. They had one team that would go out and try to find a field sparrow nest in a prairie at the Peter Cedar Creek Institute. And when they would find a field sparrow nest, they would generally mark a territory where the nest would be. It was usually between like 50 to 20 meters, I believe, or 20 to 50 meters. And then they would have a second team and a third team. The second team would be traditional searching methods, so generally walking through the grassland and trying to flush the birds out to find the nest. And then the third team was using the drone to actually fly above the grassland. They used like a lawnmower search method to find the nest as well. And then with both teams, they compared the amount of time it took to actually find the nest to see kind of which method was more efficient, the traditional methods or the drone methods. These are a couple of pictures of kind of what you could see with the drone. So you can see that that's actually a nest up in that corner or up in the left there. They flew the drone about 4 meters in the air total. So you can kind of see that with the 2 people in there as well. Here's another picture kind of showing the whole resolution. You can see that I can actually see a single egg in a nest as well. This wasn't at 4 meters, it was a little bit closer, but still pretty impressive, and it's cool to see that. And ultimately, they found that when searching for the nests in grasslands, the drone search averaged about 14 minutes faster than traditional search methods. This wasn't a statistically significant stat, but I think it shows that it's at least as effective as traditional search methods. Plus, the drone kind of has an added bonus of, you don't have to walk through the grassland and disturb the vegetation at all, or run the risk of like stepping on a nest or anything with grassland birds. However, there is not too much research on whether or not it's totally non-invasive for the birds, or whether it causes stress responses or anything like that. And so that's kind of what my research dealt with. Essentially, do the drones cause stress when you're flying above nests or in nest boxes? So that was my study, and you guys can come to my talk at 4 o'clock tomorrow if you want to hear more about the answer about that. So if you have questions, you can email either one of us. Darren Prope is my mentor. He is continuing a lot of the drone work as well. So yeah.
Any questions?
Do you have trouble getting a permit from the Fish and Wildlife Service for, you didn't violate the Airborne Hunting Act?
The what?
Did you have trouble getting a permit from the Fish and Wildlife Service to avoid violating the Airborne Hunting Act, as you potentially harass birds?
It was more flying above the nest boxes rather than, I guess, directly harassing the birds. But I don't think we had any trouble with that too much. He was the one involved in most of that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my name is Carrick Detweiler. I'm CEO of Drone Amplified, and let me actually share my screen for a second, and I can show you some presentation. Okay, so are you able to see my screen okay? Yeah, okay. So yeah, so I'm Carrick Detweiler. I'm CEO and co-founder of Drone Amplified. I'm also a professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and the work, what I'm going to be showing you today is about what our company does, which is really came out of the research lab. And what we do is we're really in the business of trying to figure out better ways to manage fires. And for prescribed fires and wildfires, there's a significant risk and damage caused by these every year. More importantly, they're putting people at risk and costing a significant amount. So what you see on the left here is somebody with a drip torch on an ATV doing a prescribed burn. This is maybe a lot of fun, but also is a very risky environment to be in when you're in the middle of a larger fire doing interior ignition. On the right hand side, you can see a helitorch. This is there are a number of these in the country, and they're even riskier, flying low and slow while you're lighting fires. And it sounds like a number of you may have experience with fire, but just a little background. These systems are used both for prescribed burns, but also on wildfires to create fire lines by doing back burns. So there's high demand for these to get out there. What our goal is to really create a safer and more affordable aerial ignition system that's drone based. And the idea is that if you talk about kind of the three currently used systems, on the left in easy terrain, you can use a drip torch and just walk along the lines. You can use then get on a vehicle with your drip torch and do ignitions, or these types of full-sized helicopter systems. The problem is, as you go increasing complexity of the terrain, the tools you need to use are both more expensive but also higher risk. So what we've developed is an aerial ignition system that we call Ignis, that is a drone-based system. So you can fly it remotely and can do a lot of the same ignition while reducing your risk significantly. So here's a picture of the system. So we designed and built the payload for it, so which we call Ignis, and it attaches to a DJI Matrice 600. So basically, a off-the-shelf drone, and it has a payload of about 400 ignition spheres, these little like ping pong ball type ignition spheres that are commonly used. There are full-size helicopter systems that use this. We can drop about 120 of these ignition spheres a minute and carry over 400 of them. If you're depending on how many ignition spheres you're putting down, this lets you to basically be flying out, come back, reload, fly out again, and you can do upwards of 500 to 700 acres an hour. And there's a lot that goes into it. So it's not just the system. There's a lot of software involved, in particular to ensure safety. So a big part of this is making sure that you're not going to have an inadvertent fire on board, or that you're not going to start a fire in an area you don't want to have a fire. So this system is also controlled by a app that we wrote, so that you can actually manage the system and fly efficiently and really easy to use. So just to give you a little bit on our app. First, you can basically it's a map interface. You're able to actually download the maps for offline use. So when you're in the middle of nowhere, you can still have your mapping information. Then you can basically set up your ignition burn by basically tapping and dropping waypoints. Like I think you learned about some other planning systems for UASs this morning. So similar idea, except we had the ability to actually say which of these lines you want to do the ignitions on. So in this picture, the yellow lines are where ignitions are going to occur. The blue is just a transit. So you can precisely control where you want to do these ignitions. Also, key to this is that, you can actually define that white boundary around it, which is, basically a box that says it'll only do ignitions in that area. So if you somehow mess up and, you try to activate a waypoint outside of that geofence there, it won't do any ignitions out of that. So that's, one of the many safety features we have on board. You can also, import overlays. So if you have, a burn plan that you have as a, geo-referenced PDF, you can import that. Or if you, are using some GIS software, you can, output your terrain information and burn plan into a KMZ, and we can input that into our app so that you can, see, your larger features there, which really, we found with our clients that, this really lets them plan in advance in the software that they're used to using, import it into our app. So when they're, actually doing the planning for the ignitions, you have all of that data right there so that you can, really find the right places to do ignitions safely. We also are able to import terrain data, and this can be used offline as well. So you can download it. So if you're in a, mountainous area, you can basically get the terrain information, download it. On the left, that shows kind of the heat map view of the terrain, but then you can look at the side view on the right and see, where the altitude is that you're going to be on for each of your, legs of your mission. And also you'll note that there's like a lighter blue versus a darker blue. You can configure that lighter blue so that, for instance, you stay under 400 feet for, FAA purposes. So, this again is another tool that we've developed so that, really have good situational awareness so that you're actually, following all the FAA regulations as well as, doing these ignitions safely.
Drone Amplified pioneered the...
Yeah, so here's a video I'll show you of our system. And if you could just give a thumbs up if you can actually hear the audio from this when it starts, I'd appreciate it, but let's see.
Drone Amplified pioneered the industry of unmanned
Okay, great, thank you.
with Ignis, providing a new technology for the fire management community. Ignis provides a means of performing aerial ignition in previously impossible conditions, like total inversions or the middle of the night. From the coastal plains of Florida to the remotest locations in Alaska, Ignis is providing a safe, affordable, innovative means of managing fire, establishing itself as an essential tool for industry professionals. The addition of a thermal camera payload is providing critical situational awareness while helping facilitate ignition operations during the day or night. Drone Amplified is excited to announce the launch of Ignis 2.0, the newest development in unmanned aerial ignition. Ignis 2.0 is a completely new design that specifically addresses the additional needs discovered by the groundbreaking deployments of Ignis 1.0. Capacity has tripled and drop rate has quadrupled, allowing the 450 sphere max payload to be dropped in under 4 minutes. This facilitates laying down miles of fire line in only a few minutes of flight. Durability and ruggedness drove the design of Ignis 2.0 and required aggressive testing to assure dependability in high temperature, dusty and ashy environments, and the extreme conditions of the wildland fire environment. Ignis 2.0 is proving itself as much more than just the next step in the evolution of unmanned aerial ignition. Utilizing feedback from UAS fire operators helped hone the system into a powerful tool that quickly gained a reputation for high performance and dependability in the field. Ignis 2.0 by Drone Amplified, a leap forward in safe, innovative fire management technology.
Yeah, so I guess that's kind of what I wanted to share. We have so we've been in business for a couple of years. This was a project again that started in my research lab. Almost 4 or 5 years ago. But we've been working closely with the Forest Service and the Department of Interior, as well as a number of states, to both develop the system and then field it. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has. I know you have a lot of talks, but if there's time, I'd be happy to answer questions.
All right, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me.
Yep, I can
All
hear
right,
you.
I'm gonna have to turn you down while we speak or we get really bad feedback. So see if you have any questions. Did anybody have any?
Are there any issues with the thermals from the fire? Is there a certain height you need to fly at?
All right, so the question was, is there any issues with having thermals from the hot air from the fires, and do you have to account for that in your flights?
Yeah, that's a good question. So,
Sorry, you have to give me 1 second to mute us.
yep. Yeah, so that's a good question about thermals. So, that was one of the things that we initially were concerned about. We found that for most of the fires we're flying over, you're not going to fly through the like thick and heavy plume. So, once you're 100 feet off the ground, as long as you're not flying through, the most intense part, there's not significant turbulence or, even heat in those areas. We do have, I will say, we do have onboard temperature sensing, so if you get in an area that's really hot, we'll alert you. We also can use that for hang fires. If, there's some sort of onboard fire, we can detect that and then actually eject the lower part of the unit to, increase safety there.
So the next question is this system only built for the Matrice 600, or can it be adapted to other drones?
Okay, yeah. So right now we primarily support the Matrice 600, although we are working on basically attaching it to other types of drones. One of the things that we've worked on a lot is also the app to actually do all the flight planning and mission planning, and so that's the main thing that's tied to the DJI system. But again, it is one of the things we're working on. If people of other drones were interested in seeing what else we could support. Yeah, so I mean, if there are no other questions, I guess I'd say, if you have any questions, feel free to, email me or, check out our website, droneamplify.com. Yeah, and I hope that you all have a good rest of your workshop here today.
Well, my name's Kevin Price. Appreciate your attention. A little bit, I'm not going to go through all this, but I put this in here because you're grabbing the screens and saving them. So if anyone's interested, I'm a professor emeritus at Kansas State University. I taught satellite remote sensing and geographic information systems for 27 years at Utah State University, University of Kansas, and Kansas State. And I speak literally all over the world on the topic of drone applications in agriculture and natural resource management. This is just a quick picture. I'm going to give you a quick picture of some of the instruments we use. This is one of the cameras we fly on a Cessna. We get 1/2 inch resolution with this camera. Each picture is 200 megapixels or megabytes. This is one of our hybrid drones, and this one we lost for 3 days. I just wanted to point out that using drones is a high-risk venture, and you will lose them. We were flying this one at night, doing surveys on deer with thermal imaging, and the plane took off on its own. And we don't know, we can't prove it, but we're pretty sure the military base that was about 5 miles away jammed some signal in the area and maybe caused that, but we don't know. Anyway, it was a lot of money. We did find it. We were able to save the cameras, but the drone was a loss. We had to replace it. To give you an idea of some of the things that we're doing with it, we're counting deer in Texas quite a lot. And what we have found is that the thermal imagery with the drone gives us twice more accurate estimates of deer populations than using the traditional helicopter counting. I'll show you a slide video, quick one here. Now watch for the deer in here. The natural color is obviously on the left. The thermal is on the right. The brighter it is, the warmer it is. So here we go. Now you tell me when you see the deer in the visible. You should be seeing the deer now. Here they come in the thermal. You see them up in the right-hand corner. They're sitting in the shade of a tree, and you can't see them that well on the without the thermal. So most of our thermal is flown at night, but that one was obviously flown during the day. We also do fly the Savant. This one's a $120,000 drone, so if this one crashes, you cry a lot. We're hoping we don't have to do that crying. We use the traditional M600, the DJI, as you saw in the last presentation, and the M210. We use a lot of different drones, but a drone without a sensor on it is just for entertainment. If you don't have a sensor on it, you can't collect data. So you need a sensor. These cameras we normally fly in the Cessna, but we do have one of these cameras. This is a 200 megapixel camera that we fly on the M600. So this camera allows us to see extreme detail if we want it. And we fly the dual thermal on all of our aircraft, our piloted aircraft, and our drones. Okay, a couple of examples. This is some grass that's taking over in parts of Kansas. It's called Old World Bluestem, and it's not highly palatable for cattle most of the time of the year. So this is a drone image we took. I want to show that how you can see the biological diversity of the landscape in the drone imagery. The light pink areas are the Old World Bluestem where it's invading. We've got a plant called Sericea, which is the legume that's invading, so on. Notice we are standing over here. Can you see my mouse? John, are you able to see my mouse when I move it? Okay. Notice the cattle were so scared they came running up to watch us fly the drone. And when we landed the drone, one of them ran up to smell it. I thought they were going to trample it. But so we didn't seem to scare these cattle very much. We also have flown over the Kanza Prairie, and these are, here's an image of bison. So you could use it for counting, obviously, wildlife. Bison here, they're pretty domesticated. Here we're doing some work. I'm the fat guy on the right, and two of my graduate students. We're flying on the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve, and I'll show you, you can see some white PVC pipe sticking up here and some over there. Those are quadrats that we've laid out ahead of time. Here's a quadrat, and this is the calibration panel. We are at 5 meters above the ground in this image. The next image, we've gone up to 20 meters above the ground. You can see the PVC pipe, quarter-meter plots, and so on. And here is at 50 meters above the ground. Once we captured the imagery, we went in and clipped the plots, and we built a regression equation. The R-squared on this was 0.90. We had a strong correlation between biomass and the red NDVI. I'm thinking we may have gotten a better correlation if we had used the green NDVI, but in this case, we used the red at 50 meters above the ground. Now, at the time we were collecting that data, we also flew the area with the Cessna 172 with the camera that had the same bands as the drone did. And we captured that at about 1 meter resolution. This area outlined in black is the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve, and then you've got surrounding landscapes around. Now, Deon showed you some of the burning of the tall grass. That's what we're talking about here. This is 388 images that have been orthomosaic together to create one image. We took the correlation model that we built with the drone imagery and applied it to the Cessna imagery and built a biomass estimate for 11,000 acres. So this is an example of scaling up to be able to look at habitat at a much larger scale. And so I wish I could tell you how accurate the map is. This was done, we did it actually just for the fun of it. We didn't even have a budget on this one, and we didn't have the biomass data to go back and be able to check the accuracy. So all we could do is show it to the people who ran the preserve, They said that this reddish area is where they were grazing heavily during the summer with their cattle and bison. And so that made sense. The red is lower biomass, and some of these areas over here, this is a valley where there's much more biomass because it's wetter and so on. So anyway, I can't tell you how accurate it is, but I wanted to throw out this as a way that you can scale up from small scale to larger scale. So you use your drone imagery, build your regression models, and then fly at a coarser resolution and apply the model. The other thing that there is in imagery is texture. And so I'm just showing an example. This is actually a midgrass prairie in central Kansas. And I've run 3 transects, the purple line, the aqua line, and the gray line. And I've plotted the pixel brightness values from one end of the line to the other, showing you how you get these different textures. The purple is in a very uniform habitat. The aqua is even in a more uniform habitat type, and the gray is in a more diverse, higher biological diversity in terms of plants and bare ground and so on. So you can use that to extract information about texture. And as you know, the wildlife are really, really tied to differences in edge, the edge effect that you talk about. The last example I'll give you is one for the lesser prairie chicken, which is on the threatened and endangered species list. What we did is we flew this with Cessna imagery and drone imagery, and then we had biologists go out and lay out quadrats on the ground and collect data. And then we did what's called geospatial analysis, where we put a circle around the plot of the point where the birds were nesting, where these lesser prairie chicken birds had nesting spots. And then within that circle, we calculated what's called a semivariance equation, or semivariance value. What that is how does the pixel values change as a function of moving further and further away from the central point? Or in other words, how does the pixel value change as I move away from the spot that the birds selected for nesting? And if we were to pick random points throughout the area, do the random points look like the sites that were being picked for by the prairie chicken? And as you see, the top, the number 58 is a site that had higher biodiversity in it, around it, and the lower one is more uniform or monotone. What we found, and I don't think I put that slide in, come to think of it. Yeah, I did, okay. So what we found is when we compared the prairie chicken habitat where they were selecting for nesting to random sites, the lesser prairie chicken semivariance curve looked like this orange line, or the kind of a yellowish orange line here. And the areas that were random were more like these down in this area that are in the blue and the darker orange. So what this is telling us is that the habitat is changing very rapidly as we move away from where the spot was selected by the bird to nest. And in the random sites, it's more uniform or monotypic in its vegetation type. And the birds were selecting for high biodiversity in the vegetation. So that, I just hit those real quick. I don't know how much time I've got, but there's some contact information. If you have questions, you want to send them to me or whatever.
Well, thank you for hanging in there on a Sunday. My name is Scott Tyler. I'm with the University of Nevada, Reno. And let's see if we can get the screen shared here. If we can do that. There we go. And we'll bring this up. Okay. Are you seeing a screen? No. Okay. Share. Let's try that. Now, how's that? Now I see a thumbs up, I think. Very good. All right. So welcome everybody again. Thank you for hanging in there this late on a Sunday. So I'm going to try to go fairly quickly. I'll show you some examples of some of the work that my group is doing. We are funded, my group at the University of Nevada, Reno, as well as Oregon State University. We're funded by the National Science Foundation for a community, what's called a community user facility. And in the Earth Sciences Division, of NSF, we have quite a few of these community facilities. Think of them like telescopes, ships, facilities in which the instrumentation is available to anyone in the community, and that community is not just necessarily NSF supported projects, but any research components or any research that's being done for the public sector typically. And the instrumentation that we operate is something called CTEMPS, the Center for Transformative Environmental Monitoring Programs. Sorry for the long name, but that was it was a popular term for the National Science Foundation at the time that we started our work, transformative. One of the things we do quite a bit of things. We do things like distributed fiber optic sensing, both acoustics and thermal measurements. That's another story. But we are funded by NSF to support unmanned aircraft activities for earth science and environmental monitoring. And so we operate a fleet of a variety of different aircraft. These are fairly old ones to do remote sensing for environmental sensing, primarily hydrology, environmental, vegetation, things like that. Okay, see if I can make this move forward. There we go. So I'll just give you a couple of very quick results. Some of the things you've already seen, mapping riparian areas. This is some mapping we did for a critical zone observatory in Colorado. This is mapping a riparian zone. This is about 300 meters by about 600 meters on a side. This is a stream channel in near Crested Butte, Colorado. Big significant differences in vegetation. You have a very dense vegetation along the riparian community and essentially sagebrush steppe on the outside of the riparian community. We do topography with structure for motion, as you've all seen. One of the things that I'm going to show you from these data, the structure for motion topography is interesting as far as the land surface topography, but we can actually back out stream topography, stream surface topography, and that's important with respect to how gradients are in the stream itself and how then the stream is interacting with groundwater and subsurface exchange, or hypereic exchange we call in the hydrologic literature. The bottom left image is an NDVI image from the same area, and again you can see green is well vegetated, red is less vegetated, lower NDVI. And you can see what was interesting in this imagery, and it's a little hard to see in this imagery, but it turns out that there were significantly higher NDVIs in the necks of the stream channels. So wherever the stream channel, the necks of these meanders came quite close together, the vegetation was more dense. And you could not see that on the ground. This was basically shrub vegetation. There was nothing on the ground to really indicate that. And what's going on then here is what we're seeing some stream water which is passing through the subsurface hypereic exchange. The steepest hydraulic gradient is right across these necks, and we're increasing both productivity. We're moving more nutrients through the subsurface, but we're also keeping the water table relatively high through here, so the vegetation is quite happy. One interesting thing, and you guys have seen this, I think, with some of the other presentations you've seen, is that using UASs or drones gives you a much higher spatial resolution on the ground because we're seeing things much closer, we're flying closer to the ground. But you also begin to understand the granularity on the land surface. And what's important here is our average NDVI across this landscape. Our pixels here are about 2 centimeters in this case. So again, NDVI is telling us something about vegetation density. Our average vegetation density index on this image is about 0.6. If I take a Landsat image from the same time, essentially in the same place, my Landsat image NDVI is about half of that. And that's because of the spatial averaging impacts of a much larger pixel. A Landsat pixel is typically almost about a 1/6 of this image, if you will, for NDVI. And the more important thing that I think we were able to use or get from these data, which I haven't seen very much before, and that's actually to map not only the surface topography of the land, but the surface topography of the water, so the water surface. And the hydraulic gradient, this figure on the bottom just shows the topography of the stream surface. So think of it like the top, it is the top of the water surface. As we move down from upstream, which is here at this point 0, and the stream is moving from your left to your right. And what you can see is the gradient is is steeper in certain places and then flattens out as we go through pools, and then drops down again and becomes steeper in other places. And where the gradients are quite steep on the stream surface, this is when we expect to see, and we do see generally, greater exchange between the surface water and the subsurface, what we call the hyporheic zone, the shallow zone that is neither groundwater nor surface water. And so we're able to map those changes in the topography of the stream surface and then go back down on the ground and look at exchange in those cases. If you were to do this by hand with some kind of either GPS or total station surveying, this would take probably weeks. And of course, the stream is changing daily and hourly, perhaps in some cases, stream surface. So being able to get this from an aircraft was pretty unique. Just a couple of other quick things that we're doing for other critical zone observatories. In this case, this is looking at using thermal imagery. We were interested in mapping field under drains, or what used to be called tile drains in the Midwest. You guys use these quite a lot to be able to get ag equipment back out on the land surface on the fields quickly in the springtime. So these fields are under drained. Nobody knows where the drains are generally, and there's multiple generations of drains. So one of the things we set out to do was to see if we could use thermal imagery over some of these ag fields to see if we could pick up where the tile drains were following precipitation. And I just want to show you kind of the resolution you can get with a high resolution thermal camera. These are footprints walking across the field. So you can see the differences in temperature just from someone walking across the field and changing the soil density, and that then affected the skin temperature. We weren't able to use the thermal camera very well. It didn't show the tile drains well at all. But this is now an image looking at this is an ag field. So this is about 600 meters across and about 1 kilometer, I think, in this direction. And we were able to see the tile drains not from thermal imagery, but simply from RGB, red, green, blue imagery. In this case, using the red channel. You could see after a rainstorm, you could see slightly lighter colors where the tile drains were in the field and were active and were actually under draining. And you can see down here, you can see all these drains. These are about 1 meter down below the land surface, and we're picking them up just with a regular RGB camera after a rainstorm. So very easy to pick up tile drains. This field itself, when we look at the actual mapping of the tile drains that are here, or the drains that are here, is crisscrossed with drains. There are probably several miles of drains in this field, but what we're seeing here is the latest generation, the last ones that have been put in, and those are the ones that are active and operational. These things only have a finite lifetime. All right, so John asked me a little bit to talk, since some of you are interested in wildlife, using unmanned aircraft to start doing fish surveying. So we did some work somewhat piggybacked on another aquatic ecology project in Mongolia, looking at taimen, and taimen are the world's largest trout, salmonid. These are big. The record, I think, is of order 2 meters and something like 100 kilograms. So this is a big fish in a river. There are very few of them, and they are quite low density. The question is, how do we inventory these fish to understand what their populations are? And typically the only way that has been done in the past in these remote areas has been angler surveys. So they're very popular fish for the wealthy to go catch. And so what we did was we said we're going to set up a couple of reaches, a couple of test cases or test plots across this river. And this is just imagery from Mongolia. This is one of the things that's interesting when you start working overseas or in challenging environments for aircraft. The remote sensing data is pretty sketchy. So the imagery that you have to work with is pretty bad. So you can see how fuzzy this imagery is. And we had no internet connection. We had nothing while we were out in the field. So this all had to be downloaded before we went. And then we just flew surveys across the rivers with, in this case, it was an older DJI Phantom 4, because I didn't want to take anything very expensive out into this field site with challenges with customs and other things. So we just flew across, and we just did then video inventories. We chose a few reaches that we expected to see fish in, and a few reaches where we expected not to see fish in. And then the idea was, can we see them? So I'm just going to show you very quickly some imagery from a place where there are where we did pick up some fish, and then we were doing some machine learning to count and size the fish. Unfortunately, I think with this transmission, it may be a little slow. Hopefully you can see this. So we popped up, we're flying at about, I think in this case, it's about 25 meters over the river. The river is about 100 meters across, 130 meters in this case. And this was a reach that we flew. We used a target for scale. So this will allow us to actually size the fish. We know what size this target is, and we know our altitude. And so now we're going to fly across the river and see what we see. In this case, this was not a pre-planned mission. We'd already picked this fish up on an organized mission where we were just flying plowing the ground kind of thing, or plowing the river. So we've just gone back to pick the fish up so you can see it on this. The water depth is about 1.5 meters on the left hand that you're seeing over the gravel, and drops off to about 8 or 9 meters in the darker parts of this image over here on the right. The flow is coming from left to right. You tell me when you see a fish. I'll tell you when I see a fish, just so you'll be happy you do indeed see them. They're quite visible. And I hope you're beginning to see there's something moving up here. There you go. The motion, it was very easy to pick these fish out from the videography, as opposed to looking at, and in comparison to any kind of attached algae or paraphyte. And the motion of the fish, the actual behavior of these large fish is really characteristic, and we actually were able to program that into some machine learning algorithms to see them. I think I'm just going to move this one ahead fairly quickly. Let's see, so you can see a little bit more. Now this is just some imagery, just staying right on top of the fishes right here. You can see, and again, I hope you can see this from where you are. It's very clear on my screen. Again, the motion, the characteristic motion of the fish swimming is very, very indicative, very easy to see. These fish were not spooked. We got us down as low as about 8 or 9 meters, I think, over them, and there was no worry. This fish is about, sorry, I can't remember exactly, but about 90 centimeters, 95 centimeters in size. And you do have to correct for refractive differences between the water and the air. So you can't just use take a measurement off of the screen. You do have to do a little bit of correction. We're also able to easily spot the much smaller species that lives in this river, which is called a lennox. It's somewhat like a rainbow trout, kind of typically 20 to 40 centimeters in size. They were very easy to spot as well in this river. So again, that fish is down in about 2 meters of water, and quite clear water. The turbidity here is about 8 or 10 NTU, or if you think in terms of dissolved organic matter, it's very low organic matter, but easily visible. And in other reaches, we saw no fish. So the idea was, now at least we can begin to characterize quite quickly, somewhat, the fish density in this case. Okay, I think that looks like that's it. All right, I'm going to move through this fairly quickly. So again, the centers, our instrument center is a community facility. It is available for anyone to use these instruments, including our aircraft. Aircraft, typically, we don't loan those out. Our other instruments, this happens to be a distributed temperature sensing fiber optic system. We bring you into the lab, we train you how to use it, we send you off with it, and we lease it out at very, very low rates. For aircraft, we're happy to lease out our sensors, the aircraft themselves, because of university issues. We don't lease the aircraft out, but these days, pretty much everybody has aircraft. That's not the challenge any longer. We started doing unmanned aircraft for environmental sensing for research projects outside of the university about 6 years ago, when it was quite challenging to fly as a university. All of you, I'm sure, went through these drama where you needed a licensed pilot, and at the time we did have licensed pilots. So I think with that, I will call it quits. I think we're getting close to my time up, and I will happily take any questions you might have, I think, or whatever you would like to do, John. I'm going to stop the screen sharing. Good. And tell me what to do. Do you want me to mute?
So I have to mute you, anytime that I'm going to talk, or else we'll get really bad feedback. So I'll see if anyone has any questions. Okay, I have a few, and so that we don't have to keep going back and forth with the audio. I was wondering if you were using any sort of filters on the cameras, like polarizers, and how that might affect it. And I guess I forgot my other question already, so I'll leave you with that one and see where that takes you.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. This was. I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact number of the polarizer because polarizers typically are numbered, but we did have a polarizing lens on this, and we did fly a few days when it was quite cloudy, and one can imagine that it didn't work very well when it's cloudy. So fish counting does require A, clear water, B, relatively direct sunlight. So we typically tried to fly it close to solar noon if we could. So we had less scattering on the water surface. And yeah, I think that's about it. Again, I just wanted to say there's the website. If you're interested in some of our instrumentation, we have a full listing of publications as well, people who are using drones and fiber optics and other things in environmental sensing. And there's an instrument request form there as well. We also have, while I have the opportunity to speak, we also have a pilot program having nothing to do with piloting aircraft, but piloting meaning for young people, young researchers and or students. If our instruments and aircraft are not being used by, I'll call them paying customers, even though cost is quite low, you can write us a 3-page proposal of something you want to try to do as a student or as a young early investigator, early career scientist, and you can get the instrumentation essentially for free. Sometimes we do ask that you pay some shipping. That's about it. Okay.